Good evening.
Everywhere I go on this island, it seems to me I find degeneracy.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes. See, it's a lot scarier when there's no motive, Sid.
We have a bargain.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes.
Do you feel the pain? Oh, it's the pain, I can assure you, will be exquisite.
Watch a few movies, take a few notes.
His entire work consists of violence, all the time, obsessed with the issue of violence. Mayhem, gouging out of eyes, autopsies on the stage.
Come. It is time to keep your appointment.
Welcome, welcome. Episode 185. We are covering Ben Wheatley's A Field in England as part of our modern folk horror series. If no one has been there for the rest of it, hi, etc. We looked at folk horror as it started, very grounded in England in the 1970s. All the fears, all the issues of things going on at that time were fed through the horror dream machine and expressed in a really unique form of rural-based horror, which has, I don't know, some would say a tinge of the reactionary vibe to it. Having spent a whole month doing that, we're now looking at modern folk horror. So after basically a 30-year break, roughly, the genre sort of started bubbling up again. You've got entries like Kill List from Ben Wheatley. You've got The Bitch. You've got Midsummer. So we want to see how well, how closely does it stick to the classic folk horror? Is it the same beast? Let's see how we go. Hello, everyone who is a familiar person. It's very good to see you. Lots of new names as well. Do stick around, do all the usual YouTube stuff. You know how it goes. And I'm covering this topic with two fantastic guests, no stranger to the stream. We have with us Simon Roberts, a bit of a veteran of our folk horror coverage now.
Becoming that way, yes. Good evening, and good evening, chat. Good evening, Harry. And yes, I've been living with Douglas Murray all week, as everybody knows, and I'm, as he would say, I'm delightful to be here.
And your performance on the Joe Rogan podcast was terrible, Simon. Really, you didn't have to assassinate his character quite so much.
Have you ever been on the Joe Rogan podcast?
No, actually, not yet. I was actually speaking to Jay Burden about that the other day before I did the interview on his channel. And I said to him that his performance was so bad on Joe Rogan that for the first time I've seen American anti-British, anti-European sentiment bubbling up because of that. And for the first time, I actually agree.
Yeah, it didn't do us any favours.
If Douglas Murray is your reference point for British people, I can understand why you hate us so much.
Yeah. Anyway,
it's him or Stephen Fry. Like, take your pick.
Oh no, yeah. When Stephen pops off, Douglas is going to be national treasure.
Oh dear. Anyway, hello. It's nice to be on again. Hello, Chad.
Oh yes. Yeah, we didn't introduce you. Sorry.
Well, that's because I butted in.
That's a appropriate word.
Which is fine. And also, I must say as well, it's a pleasure to finally be on a stream panel with Simon. I can finally knock that one off of my bucket list.
Hey.
Yes,
thank you very much.
Hopefully, everyone. You're too humble, Harry. I'm sure many will know you, but just in case, he's a man who, when I told him I drove a Ford, he said, "Oh, they make cars too."
He's one of the greatest political philosophers of our time. Yeah, fine. You know what to do. You can find me on Lotus Eaters. I'm the guy who I've been told and informed recently, it's been reported, looks like Prince Charming from Shrek 2.
Also looks astonishingly like a young David Lynch. Genuinely.
Would you say so? Oh, well, you know,
tell
I'll
you what,
take that.
I'm going to look up young David Lynch. I'm going to get the picture up.
That man was quite the charmer who got around, so I will take...
I mean, you're the only man on Lotus Eaters who experiments with facial hair, which I think is what a gentleman should be doing in this prime period of his life.
Oh, I've gone through quite a few right now. Although at the moment, the clean-shaven look with the sideburns is what I'm sticking to for the foreseeable future as I'm growing out my hair.
Yeah. Keep it like Sergeant Bourne in Zulu or something like that.
Oh, yeah, I'll take that. Are you finding young Lynch?
I mean, I've got a choice. This is all just kind of adorable. Okay, let's see what I can do. Let's give this one a go. Oh, no, that's not a particularly flattering one. Hang on. No, I can't find the one from Room to Dream. It's so close. No, I'll leave it.
He was a handsome laddie. I mean, with his floppy hair when he was filming Dune. I've seen the sort of footage of that. And
what in his tiny little desert hot pants? Yeah. Those are some great.
They reminded me of light infantry shorts from the Bush War.
Oh yes, and even towards the end of this...
I'm sorry to post from Reddit, but this was a fairly decent. Yeah,
I can kind of see it in that picture.
That looks like a high school senior year or something, doesn't it?
Yeah, there are even better ones. So that will be him with Peggy Lynch and a baby Jennifer.
Yeah.
So that would be pre-June.
And let's also have some positivity towards late-era Weather Report Lynch when he was going through lockdown and had the big beard with the hair combo. That was a great look.
Oh, I never saw that. Yeah.
Oh, you should look it up. He looked very cool.
Sort of Old Testament, was he?
A little bit. I'll see if I can find it.
Yeah.
Send it to Chloe to send through to you.
Go for it. While you're doing that, I'll do my own shilling because my wonderful supportive Americans tell me you can't be too British on YouTube. You've got to actually shill yourself. No matter how uncomfortable. I will simply say we're on YouTube. You know how to support us. If you want to go a step beyond that, you can do membership either here or on Subscribestar. Links are in the description. And best thing about doing it as a membership is you can vote on topics. You get to vote for a particular film to be covered. And you've got a load of exclusive content too. And I will say there is an extra thing on this stream that hopefully is working. I've set a stream goal, 10 super chats, and we will have a bonus stream. And there's a bonus stream that Simon is going to join me for, where we are going to unpick one of the foundations of horror, an essay called The Uncanny. We're going to sort of break it down from what is fairly dry, impenetrable, Austrian Jewish psychologizing into how it actually turns up in the films that you know and love. So if that motivates you, please do. Oh, have you got it, Harry?
Yes, I sent it through to you on Twitter. Also, you were roboting for me. Is that on my end or your end?
Ooh. Anyone else get roboting?
No, it was fine. No, everyone sounds good.
It's hotel Wi-Fi in that case. Apologies, folks. But I did send it through to you, Chloe. So
you're in a hotel?
Yeah, I'm in Swindon. I stay in hotels when I'm in Swindon.
I've got an image from because coming onto the stream, I've got an image of you like, oh, there he is. Yes, look at that.
I like
look at that.
Doesn't entirely look unlike me at the moment.
I like it. I like it.
Yeah, I think he's got.
What image did you have of me then, Simon?
I was thinking because coming onto this stream, of course, I had to go away and bone up on Ben Wheatley because I didn't really know his work that much, and I'd been looking for an excuse to watch A Field in England for years. I recorded it when it came out on the sort of simulcast. It was done in the cinema and on the TV on the same night.
Oh yes, it was one of the first films to do that, if I remember.
And I never got around to watching it. I just thought I've got to have a sort of purpose to watch this one day and really, bathe in it because it got such a lot of adulation at the time. And now, 12 years later, I finally got around to watching it.
Eventually, yes.
And I took a detour to look at Kill List as well. And I found that a fascinating kind of film. And I think there's a weird thing when you see Ben Wheatley interviewed. He kind of does that thing of he plays down his intelligence a bit. I think he comes across as a kind of blokey bloke. But
he looks astonishingly like the chap from Severance.
Yes, Mr. What's his name?
Therapist. Rickon.
Yes, 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 a little bit. Yeah, yeah. He's kind of got a thing though where he plays it down a bit, and I think there's some deep ideas in his films. I'll just say that. I
Yeah,
said,
there's a lot going on under the surface.
and the fact they kind of the way he does the thing of taking contract killers and making their work very mundane. So they're just like traveling salesmen living in nasty commuter hotels. You know, this kind of bleak life. And if you've lived in those sorts of places, you know what I mean.
Yeah, well, that's basically what I'm like right now. Whenever I go down to Swindon, as I said, I do not live in Swindon anymore. I live back home since I had my daughter. So that means that when I'm in the office, I have to stay in dingy Swindon hotels, but I make it work. On the subject of Wheatley's work, interestingly enough, this is probably the 4th time I've watched this film, and it's the first time in maybe 8 years. Because I was introduced to Wheatley quite young and to his work quite early on, around the time the Kill List came out, because I used to be an avid magazine reader when I was a teenager, and I used to read Empire magazine all of the time. Does anybody remember Empire?
Oh, what a throwback.
Yeah.
My goodness.
And I remember flipping through the pages of one issue in 2011, and there was a review of Kill List in there that gave it 4 stars out of 5. Said it was a really interesting contract killer cult horror film that was unlike anything that you'd seen, with some pretty brutal hammer action in there. And I thought, that sounds awesome. And I watched it. I would have been 15 at the time. It blew my mind, quite like the main character does. And I needed to watch more of this guy's film. So I actually didn't watch Sightseers until a few years ago. But when A Field in England came out, I saw that it was this experimental, abstract, confusing masterpiece that I'd heard about. So I thought, I need to watch that. I watched it once, had no idea what was going on the entire time. Watched it again, literally with pen and paper, trying to take notes to figure out what the bloody hell happens in the last 20 minutes. Didn't figure it out at the time, and then made the mistake a year into the relationship of showing it to my missus, who that was one of those things where she was like, never show me that again, Harry. Never make me watch that film again. Yeah. And this is the first time since then that I've actually watched it.
This is like AA's story about having like Pasolini's Salo as a date movie.
I've still never watched that, but from what I know of it, I can understand. I think it's when you get to the scenes of them expecting each other's penises, where you get a nice big schlong shot, where she turned to me and said, "Harry, what the hell are we watching right now?"
Yeah.
And you were only watching that on Blu-ray. People were in the cinema and got that.
Yeah, people got it. Really must have been a few yards in the cinema.
Yeah, I hear it was released uncut.
Well, I mean, it was. I mean, it was only a few years later when Cromwell got them back into the country, anyway, wasn't it?
I have no idea what he's talking about, but I think there's interesting relations between those films. Though,
I mean, I saw. Oh yeah, go on.
No, I'll just blather on just for a little bit. I was just saying the interesting connections between those films, though, because I listened to your excellent review stream on Kill List from a year ago now or something.
Yes.
And we, Chloe and I talked about this on DM before this stream, and I felt the interesting thing about Kill List, it was like a Jacobean revenge tragedy meets a Ken Loach film with a detour to Wicker Man at the end. But I liked the interpretation line you were going down, Harry, where there was this kind of sort of social critique in the different victims in the film and what they represented and the rejection of them by these characters and in this sadistic way. So I kind of liked that. I sort of wanted to hear more of that idea developed. But that was in the stream, and I think it sort of ended. I mean, I could have streams like this that go on for several hours, so I would have been happy for you to expatiate on that. But what you were talking about was very interesting.
Of course, oftentimes on these streams, what I'll do is waffle on and develop the interpretation as I'm talking. So, that might be that might be what you were experiencing then. Is that I was going down a nice, interesting avenue and then lost my train of thought.
Yeah,
that is a lot better than when you do the stream and then you come away afterwards and thinking, "Oh, among that one, how did I miss it?"
Well, I think that's going to be that's going to be my experience with this stream in particular, because I watched it earlier on today, and I have a rough idea in my mind of the themes that the film may have been going for. But still, that last 20 minutes, if you're to take any of it literally and not just as a mushroom-fueled hallucination, particularly with characters returning from the dead multiple times, is very difficult to follow in a literal interpretation of the narrative that's being presented. And so I think that there's a lot of thematic stuff going on. I would also imagine that there's a lot of actual references to English folklore that I might not be familiar with, that's being put into this film, with the characters being resurrected. Some of those scenes where they're all standing still, almost like a portrait.
Yes, I've got one of those if you want.
Yes, which is particularly interesting because they're not shown as stills. It's them in real time standing as still as possible. So you can see them blinking, you can see their arms shifting. It's very interesting how it's done.
So-called tableau
I can't
vivant.
capture it here. Yes, tableau vivant indeed. I can't capture it here because I've got a still, but if you're watching the film, like literally they will hold this for about 5 seconds and then you'll get a close-up on each actor.
Yeah. It's a technique that a filmmaker called Patrick Keeler, who I like, uses a lot. He basically does locked off shots of static compositions, but there may be dynamic movement within the compositions. He does sort of documentary type films rather than dramatic films. But it's always, again, bringing in my Adam Curtis law a bit. It's interesting because when you let the shot run long, you notice all of these interesting things that come out. And this is sort of like, it seems like an evocation of the visual culture of the period, which is basically woodcuts. And the sort of the particular disposition of the hands, you notice in the shots.
You have a line in there. What is it with you and hands?
Yeah,
it's sort of directing us quite clearly to it.
Yeah. But it's this sort of scene from a time, pre the notion of sequential imagery, which obviously we have on film, multiple repeated still images making up an apparently moving image. And of course this is more of an interesting thing because it's the age where you don't know what's come before the image here. In their time the woodcut just exists as a static feature, and you don't know what comes after, so it's highly suggestive but it's never completely conclusive. There's sort of these ambiguities in it. You look at the expressions. You see Jacob on the right there looks kind of, doubtful. Friend is sort of slightly confused, and our sort of hero Whitehead. Yeah, and Whitehead sort
on his knees,
indicating something off stage almost, So
Whitehead's also sort of presaging his possession and zombie-like scene later.
I've got to say I'm a big fan of Reece Shearsmith in this film and in Inside Number 9 and some of the excellent and very clever episodes that they've done of that show. And he does a great job here, especially with some of his more haunting facial expressions during the possession scene, which was one of the first things when I watched the film originally that really struck me.
It's an astonishing sequence, that, absolutely. I mean, I found the commentary to the film. I don't normally sort of do the commentaries. Somebody's uploaded the audio from it on YouTube, and I listened to it, and it's interesting. Wheatley saying we just didn't know what he was going to do on the day, and he came out. It was just this astonishing, this demented automaton that he's been possessed, and then he's just kind of figuring out after that about, he lets it run long, and it's just simply a question of what music we're going to put to it, and he picks this brilliant piece, Chernobyl by Black Mass.
Oh yeah, that's interesting that it was kind of done on the day. I would have expected. I know that this was a very, very quick turnaround for the actual production and filming. So I would have expected them to have it all planned out very, very, very precisely. So the fact that they go in not knowing what Shearsmith was going to do with his performance here is quite spectacular. A lot of trust is being put into him there.
Wheatley, what I saw of him saying was that he did go in with a very planned shot list. He's the impression I get of him, and chat has been, correct to point out that he has done a wide range. Like there is some stuff. I don't think we'll get as much analysis out of his directing of the Meg 2.
He did a couple of episodes of Peter Capaldi, Doctor Who. I think that this for me is the last of his absolutely brilliant run from Kill List, Sightseers, and then this.
Yeah.
After this was High Rise, the adaptation of the novel, which I was excited when it first came out, but then watched it and I found it to be quite a middling film. I'd have given it maybe a 6 out of 10.
Definitely.
Whereas those three films, Sightseers is just a really fun film, despite how dark the subject matter. It's absolutely hilarious. But Kill List and this are his two masterpieces. And this is still one of those films where, up until I watched it earlier on today, I was still concluding, is it a masterpiece or is it a complete mess? And I think I'm coming back around to it being a work of abstract genius.
I think it is, yeah. I think that definitely is. And I'm sort of a convert to Reece Shearsmith now, because I never got into the League of Gentlemen. I only really knew him and Michael Smiley, who's in the film. I only really knew them from Spaced, Is
Shearsmith in Spaced?
He plays
briefly, the Robot Wars episode.
Yeah.
I
haven't thought of that. And
well, I never got into League of Gentlemen either, but then my missus loves Inside Number 9, and sitting with her when she's been watching that and actually paying attention to some of the episodes, there are such clever premises and such clever writing in that show sometimes.
Oh, absolutely. And Shearsmith, as you know, like everyone in the league, is a big horror fan. But I just want to say that, as Harry, you're supported. He is on an extremely tight budget. He went in with a very controlled shot list, so that he didn't have to do lots of take-in coverage, which was how they could film it so quickly, get it all done for 300. But I think he still had flexibility. He's the impression I get, and I'll open this out to you guys. He has made quite a few references to our favorites, Kubrick, Lynch, and he does the thing where he sort of throws out something that's kind of easy for people to get, like, oh, you can just say it's mushrooms if you want, but there's a lot more going under the surface. He hasn't yet had the time or the money that Kubrick and Lynch eventually got, but he's very inspired by them. Like, I think the Tableau Vivant are very much a Barry Lyndon tribute as well. Kubrick was clearly staging paintings in that as well.
Oh yeah, there's that classic image from near the end of Barry Lyndon when his son's died and his wife's son has come to confront him, and he's sat around in that room in the blue coat on the chair, slumped over. That's a beautiful image.
Yeah. And it's just like a painting. I also want to say big thank you, SC Remain. You kicked us off sending $10 and brilliantly supporting the bonus stream. You do not have the attention span for Freud. No one can blame you. And you want it horror-splained. Excellent. Yes, we will pick it apart. Not everyone wants to spend 5 pages in German etymology. So I do not blame you. We will make it come alive. We'll make it interesting. And RA, who has come over from AA, never heard of him. AA stream, Adam Curtis, episode 40. By the way, obviously, the best stuff. The best series. We love it. Well, after Sly Sneak's rap battles, obviously.
There you go.
Great to see the best of the Lotus Eaters is starring No Disagreement. And second of the 10 super chats, no doubt. Yes, we're counting them down. If you want to pitch in and you want to get us that bonus stream, do pitch in. Okay, wonderful.
So how do you want to charge in?
I'm torn. I feel like this one, we could give a plot summary, but it would be a bit tricksy, but roughly, just to set this up for you, if you haven't seen it, this is from Ben Wheatley. We've discussed some of his previous films. He is working on the most British of budgets, and he is working with his collaborator Amy Jump, who did the writing. She also co-wrote Kill List. Something very interesting, if you've seen them talk together, Simon, is they very much disagree, and that they have a nice little collegiate disagreement on what Kill List was about in a post-film interview, which I loved. In this one, what we're seeing is, I think, basically Amy Jump's vision. and Ben Wheatley just did the directing. He did the original script, struggled with it, and then she sort of junked it and wrote her own version tailored to their budget. But in short, what we're getting here is nominally the surface narrative is that in the English Civil War, no date is given, of course.
Can I give, before you go too much, can I give my personal plot synopsis?
Oh, please. Absolutely, Harry. Rock on.
Royalists and parliamentarians during the English Civil War come together to fight the true enemy, the Irish.
I can't really disagree.
No. He's got us there.
They do make a number of points to remark on how Irish Michael Smiley is, particularly his references to Cromwell and what's been done to his people that he says, and how he says that he wants to struggle cuddle a particular part of the English landscape as revenge.
Yeah. Other things that come out when I've researched this, actually, people weirdly are specific about a date for this film. It's set in 1648. I don't know where they get that information from. I thought I have to rewatch the film again and see if they use a title card or there's
the date in the film.
Yeah, there's I don't think there's anything mentioned at all. There's various clues, and at one point we learn that Whitehead, Reece Shearsmith, says that we're somewhere in Monmouthshire, so we're on the kind of border with England. And from the start of the film, obviously, the initial exposition is these characters bursting from the edge of this field out of a hedge, and so we're already signalling we're well into the liminal space here. So we're in the borderlands, in a kind of dream zone. That we're going to move into, and the history in that sense, in our sort of folk horror arc, as we've talked about before, it's not quite precise. It's a bit fluid and variable. Like we saw with the M.R. James, some dates don't correlate with other dates, and the historical, you can't pin it too closely to any history. So there weren't any big battles in Monmouthshire in 1648. There was a battle in South Glamorgan, but a bit of a way.
It's very interesting if it's in Monmouthshire as well, because is that not in Wales?
Well, it's the borders. It's
the borders.
He talks at one point about going to Gloucester, which is just to the west. Yeah. So you get the impression that there's a sort of certain element of confusion about where they are, and an ambiguity about that. And I think Wheatley probably keeps it just blurry enough, in our sort of tradition of the location and the time are out of joint.
Yeah, and you also mentioned them passing through into this liminal space. I definitely got the feeling that this hedge, this large bush that they pass through, seems to be a gateway to another realm that they enter and then leave at the end, which might explain why the characters are back alive when he goes through the bush again, the hedge again at the end. But it seems that there is a definitive edge to the space, because you get a few scenes of characters walking off into the distance, and in particular, I didn't actually catch his name. I was referring to him as the soldier when I was thinking about this. What was his name? There's not Cutler, right? I got Cutler's name. Jacob. I didn't know that they actually give his name in the film, so that I must have missed it very early on. But Jacob at one point seems to be trying to walk off into the distance after Friend has been killed, and right before Whitehead begins taking all of the mushrooms. And in that enormous abstract trip sequence, which has all of the very trippy visuals of what appears to be separation and then synthesis, he appears at one point to be trying to push through the outer edge of some barrier, just using his body language. But it gave me the inference that he might have been hitting the barrier of where they are that wouldn't let him leave.
Yeah. There's definitely an odd space-time arrangement, isn't there? You see them traipsing through, is it one field or several fields they've gone through? And the way that the light changes in the film, this all seems to take place on one day, but one very extended day. It doesn't seem to sort of obey. It sort of darkens at one point, and the clouds move, and you think it's sort of getting to evening, but then it's bright again. And I don't think that's sort of accidental. It is a kind of magical time zone.
And
Wheatley said 5 days in one interview that I saw. But he's otherwise cagey about it, and just as used to
be represented in the film to me.
No, it's deliberately obscured, just like he never gave you a date. and he gives clues. I'll just throw out a very basic reference here that came to my mind. I'm sure you chaps have seen Gladiator maybe once or five
Yes.
times.
Yes.
Oh, really?
I've never watched Gladiator.
Oh, apologies. Right. Well, so
You can
if you
spoil
do,
it for me.
no, it's a single line from the start of the film prior to a big battle with the Goths. I'm sure as a metal fan, you've battled with many a Goth in your time, Harry, so it'll be familiar to you.
Plenty.
It's Russell Crowe saying, men, if you get lost in battle and wake up, finding yourself in a field at peace, do not worry, for you have already died. It's something like that. But I just thought that, oh, hello, hang on.
Yes, I mean, towards the end, during that trip sequence, it really goes on to highlight a scene very early in the film when they're just escaping from the battle, where Whitehead is reeling off of the concussive sounds of cannon fire. And the fact that it highlighted that seemed to me to be Wheatley maybe planting the seeds that this was a very pivotal moment early in the film, where perhaps he's been knocked unconscious. I mean, this would be a very cheap, kind of easy explanation of the film. Perhaps he's knocked unconscious and it's all a dream, or perhaps he's dead and he's in an afterlife where the devil is tormenting him in the figure of his former protege O'Neill. So I think there are seeds planted that point in that direction. But also, go on.
No, you finish.
I was just going to remark as well the idea of the liminal space confusion of time, where they are, what's going on. There's also, of course, the scene that we referenced in the still image where they're all pulling the rope, and they're pulling the rope to get O'Neill, and he appears at the end of the rope, seemingly out of nowhere, which seems to be part of some kind of magic ritual that they're taking part in, because the rope is attached to that stake that's in the ground. Except you get shots of the stake, which they're pulling in the opposite direction to, unwinding and twisting, and the rope shifts in their direction, which is the opposite direction of where they should be pulling. So it seems to be suggesting that even within the space they already are, that they are shifting, they are being moved by magic.
Oh, I missed that.
And then when they get O'Neill in the field with them, he's attached to the rope, but then he immediately takes them to his tent, where he seems to have been camped out for quite a while, I would assume. So there's many questions raised by how long he's been there, why it was this particular ritual that needed to summon him, what he's been doing there. It raises all of these questions and draws it, and really makes you wonder, have they pulled him into their realm, or has he pulled them into his realm?
Yeah. There's this. You go on.
Oh, sorry. I just wanted to apologies for delays on the super chats. Just wanted to thank Daniel Hall for sending $10, saying, adding to our discussion, it was very evocative of experimental proto-folk horror, like The Mask of the Red Death. That as folk horror, I'm not as sure on that one. You'd have to sell me on the case. I mean,
proto-folk horror, he's saying.
Depends how much you lean on the proto, but I'd be interested in that. It also felt subtly liminal, very much so.
Sorry. I was just going to say,
thank you very much,
Simon off a few times. So
Simon.
I want Simon to be able to make his point, because I'm very interested.
I was just going to add to what you were saying. It's I think there is a kind of pivot point in this sort of context of the film, the sort of historical context and the story that's laid out. I mean, what you've got there in that image, we went from them bursting out of the hedge and the cannon, the very conspicuous cannon going off. And I think, reading around this subject, I mean, I've read there's lots of interesting stuff out there, and I'll come to some specific names in a minute. But one of the things is, obviously, this is a moment of sort of technological, shock. Techno shock, as it were. There's a very interesting academic called Diane Purkis, who I've come across. I don't know if any of you know that name. She's a professor of English Lit at Oxford and a fellow of Keble College. And she's written some interesting stuff. And, I started reading some of her stuff thinking, oh, God, is this going to be some dreary feminist academic? She's not, actually. She's actually very interesting because she focuses on fairies, witchcraft, and the Civil War. And she's got an interesting essay called Desire and Its Deformities, which I took a bit off. And one of the things she talks about is that at this point in history, war has changed. You've got the kinds of battles where cannon are being used effectively. I mean, cannons have been around since about 1346, with Battle of Cressy, very crude ones, but they become effective in the Civil War. And people are being introduced to kind of, Vietnam levels of horror in the early modern period. She talks very interesting passages, accounts from the time, officers talking about, bodies being split apart, legs and arms flying everywhere, people's bowels and brains flying in faces. And they've never really encountered this sort of horror in battle. It's not that they haven't seen horrific battles, but this is a different kind of thing. And the cannon functions, as you see in the film, generates all this smoke everywhere. And one of the sort of themes of the film is about the understanding that is gained through sight and the eye in particular, lots of close-ups of eyes. You have lines at the beginning of the film as Whitehead bursts out and he's disorientated and Cutler says, "What do you see, friend?" And he says, "Nothing, only shadows, perhaps." And this idea of the shadows recurs through the film. But this obscured vision is kind of one of the themes I think that comes through. And in her accounts, that she brings up, talking about these battles in the Civil War, you've got people. There's one chap. He's a combatant in one of the battles, and he's saying the air was so darkened with smoke of powder that for a quarter of an hour, I dare say there was no light to be seen. But what the fire of the volleys gave, 'twas the greatest storm that ever I saw, in which I thought I knew not whither to go nor what to do. In the fire, smoke, and confusion of that day, I knew not for my soul whither to incline. And what Perkis goes on to talk about is this increasing fear of people. They're being engulfed in battle. They're being overloaded. And this desire to see their way out of it is what kind of impels this story. They're literally having to sort of get out of this darkened space to try and escape. And they're full of doubt about whether they're, deserters, and the sort of moral, the grief and conscience about that. But the further you go on, you see that it begins to be about this vision of this magical space, and the hallucinations, I suppose, that come later in the film are about us passing into this. I suppose she talks a lot about, it's about the fairies, really. And there's a lot of fairy lore that comes into play here, which, I can go into a bit later on. But it's where you have a completely different sense of reality that's not dictated by the sort of forms that we would understand. I mean, we look at the film as confusing, and we put it down to just it's like a drug trip, and it's kind of random. But actually, there is a different set of laws on the other side of that hedge that are actually really quite specific. And she sort of goes into how these come out of ancient fairy lore, and especially in particular, there was one chap, a Scottish minister, Robert Kirk. He wrote a book called The Secret Commonwealth in 1692, The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns and Fairies. And he goes in sort of remarkably close detail to lots of things in this story, to the kind of laws governing this space, and how you can learn to see them if you kind of know the signs. So what you're saying, Harry, about you sort of have to do a little bit of research around the film in a way to understand what's going on. I don't think they just did this randomly. I suspect Amy Jumps probably read some of this stuff.
Yeah, I get the feeling from watching it. The very fact that they felt the need and the desire to make a film like this based in the English Civil War in the first place suggests that they have a certain interest in that period. That's all very, very interesting that you've what you've illuminated there. And it certainly helps to understand some of the imagery that's presented later in the film, particularly what you're talking about, this vision, sight, clouded vision, would help me to perhaps put a bit of a more concrete interpretation for myself on the large growing black circle that you see later on in the film being like the ultimate expression of obscured vision, a completely blacked out eye that's growing and growing.
I may have something on that. Also, I could be talking nonsense, but I think I pieced together what they were doing with that. when we get to it later. But that's great research. I'd say this is kind of a Midsummer film, very similar to Midsummer. Like there's lots of stuff that you could. It's very deliberately in there. You can look it up if you want to. You can do the research. Like they are letting you see when Whitehead coughs up runes, what is on the runes. They are giving you the chance to see. Oh gosh, where is it? I got
the feeling when they show the runes and they show the runes on them, that I was thinking, like, I bet if you did a little bit of research, you could figure out what those runes are.
Possibly. Wheatley did say in the commentary, actually, we didn't actually use standard like Nordic runes or anything like that.
Damn you, Wheatley.
So but again, it's
You've just crushed all of my hopes.
No, but I think this is the problem. I think Wheatley, he trades. There's a certain ambiguity that filmmakers love. Like I say, he downplays, I think, his intelligence and his references as well. There's things that I've picked up, things that you picked up, and no doubt you've picked up as well, that he doesn't kind of completely explicate when he talks about stuff. And he kind of, he talks about, I find exposition very boring. Let's just sort of get on with it. And it's kind of, it all seems very workmanlike and rough. But actually, I think, and certainly with Amy Jump as well, there's a bit of depth here.
Well, this is something I noted with Kill List as well, and it was only through watching this film way back then that I really noted it with Kill List as being particular to his style, at least in these two films, is that, as you say, there seems to be a very specific narrative and set of rules that are driving events forward and that things are operating by. He's just chosen to rip any and all exposition of that outside of what is inferred or makes sense for the characters to say, given the situation. He's ripped all of that exposition out, which makes it more of an interesting puzzle for the audience. And it's something, obviously we've already spoken about Lynch, but it's something that I recognize from Lynch as well, which is that people always say something like, oh, Twin Peaks is so confusing. But I watch that and I see, no, it seems to me that there's a very specific set of rules that Frost and Lynch have worked out that are all operating behind the scenes, where there's a logic to everything. They just don't tell the audience what those are, so you kind of have to figure them out themselves. And that's a much more engaging way of writing a mystical narrative like that for me.
Yeah. You do have to work at this.
Do you think that, I saved this just for the before we go into a very famous, very disturbing scene. I saved this little screen cap just because you can see there's symbols on O'Neill's hand. And I wondered if that was a specific thing as well. I couldn't make that out, but
I think he mentions that O'Neill's got spells written on his hands.
I didn't notice those. That's an excellent catch.
Yeah.
Well, there's some stuff like I'm rubbish at my research mostly, but when we have things like a little bit of symbolism, like this shot of O'Neill walking into the spider's web, when the tables turn again and suddenly O'Neill is pursued, and he's like the fly coming into the spider's web.
And
I love that stuff. That's where I feel smart for a second.
Exactly, and that's a great example of what we was talking about there, is that this is, you're viewing the human through a different set of rules that exist in this place. You're seeing it through, there's lots of very evocative, what you call B-roll footage, of sort of bugs creeping through the grass, and just there's like murmurations of the grass as the wind is blowing across it, and all sorts of natural phenomena. And actually, I think this is sort of, I'm not saying agenda in the film, but there's definitely a theme about you. And Diane Perkis talks a lot about this as well. As there's a tendency for us to try and interpret these sorts of historical pieces, which have a good deal of anachronism in them, but through the sort of simplistic prisms of our modern life. We look at this and think, oh, it's just like a rave, really. It's like a bunch of people taking drugs in a field. And there's a very sort of very shallow interpretation to be taken from it. But actually, she talks about, the way that they believed in things like fairy lore. And I'm not talking about, fae kind of, Tinkerbell, Cottington fairies, but the notion of fairies that existed at this time is something very much based in things like the uncanny. That the kind of world of fairies we're talking about, it was essentially a parallel species that were here before us, and have since been displaced, and they've been displaced to these marginal areas. She talks about how essentially they mostly, there's these kind of rules about fairies. She did a good talk with Louise Perry on her podcast, Maiden Mother Matriarch, and she describes fairies and the sort of the kind of the rules about them that come out of the literature at the time. And she said the fairies, the various characteristics, they're almost immortal. They're human-like in appearance. They tend to live in non-arable nature, so not farms, not sites of production, but they live in these gaps, the gaps between, civilization. And she describes them as saying they are beings that have knowledge and capabilities that human beings don't have, including typically an ability to tell the future, to locate buried treasure, a knowledge of healing, a lengthy historical knowledge. I mean, doesn't this all remind you of Whitehead?
It does remind me of Whitehead. It also brings to mind, again, how Friend is killed multiple times through the film, but seems to always get back up. If you say that these magical fairy creatures have incredible powers of healing, that could explain why it is that he's able to get back up again.
Well, that goes straight to Kirk, the Scottish folklorist who did The Secret Commonwealth of Elves, Fauns and Fairies. He talks about in the fairy realm that they're called the subterraneans. I mean, he writes this in the late 17th century. And he talks about everyone, if you like, in the fairy realm is there's a double of every person who lives on Earth in the fairy realm. And he calls these doubles double men or co-walkers. So what happens is the double man has taken over the life of the person he resembles in an act of supernatural identity theft. Yeah. So,
okay, that makes Friend's reappearance towards the end of the film a lot creepier. Now that you've said that, it also helps to explain why it was that he called towards O'Neill.
Yeah. So the fairies can be the doppelgangers as well, and they can. They can defy these rules. They can't be killed by normal weapons as such. So they're operating in fairy space here, and so these rules that we think of don't apply. They're kind of the mirror visions of the physical world. And there's elements in fairy lore about fairies abduct humans to make them work. As our characters are kind of effectively abducted as well. So I mean, it calls into question what O'Neill is. He talks about the fairies; they have their own aristocratic class. So they're kind of like us, but kind of not like us. There's some inversions that go on. But one of the interesting things that Diane Purkis talks about, well, there's this element, this sort of theme that also runs under it as well, is that it's a colonized space. We have colonized their space. Yeah, is there, and there's something in that for us, perhaps, as if the film is an allegory of the present time, and without me hitting that nail on the head too hard.
Well, you kind of picked up on a couple of points where it sounds like what we have is what I've seen written about as a technological shock. So the sort of the intrusion of the modern into the fairy space, the intrusion of canon technology or functional, efficient canon technology into the battlefield. I've seen it elsewhere. Do you know Yojimbo from
no,
what's his name?
Kurosawa?
Japanese lad. Kurosawa, yes.
Right.
I can't recommend that enough. It's a short film. It trades in a lot of theatrical grotesques, but the film sort of absolutely pivots when one of the characters comes into this samurai movie with a gun he's acquired from an American. And just the whole world of the film is turned on its head at that point, because suddenly the chap with his sword is no better than anyone else, no more efficient, and it's it really does come off as shocking what it does to your world.
And I think Wheatley's he's playing games of resonances with modernity there, because in that, going back to that first shot of the the cannon strike, Whitehead, he goes deaf. I mean, it's purely an allusion to kind of Saving Private Ryan. It's saying, look, here's this kind of modern phenomenon. Oh, we all know now, you go deaf when there's a sort of explosion near you, and you sort of reel around, and we're using this filmic convention now of the sound goes muffled, and the character staggers around for a bit. So he's kind of, and the way the characters walk around, it's very like shots in Saving Private Ryan, where American soldiers kind of, walk around the French bocage talking at the tops of their voices, in the way that, real soldiers don't. Filmic soldiers do that.
Honestly,
Are you telling me that Saving Private Ryan wasn't entirely accurate?
I'm not saying it's complete propaganda, but I sort of am.
It's not like they chose to make all of the Allied soldiers die bloody deaths so that that they're human, whereas the Germans died bloodlessly for a reason.
Yeah. Well,
that would never have been intentional. Simon, everything that you're saying is making me question now whether the Whitehead that we see exit the fairy realm at the end of the film is even the same Whitehead that we see enter. Because, of course, there is all of that imagery when you're referring to the doppelgangers and fairy people during the mushroom sequence, where that shows it's got the mirror image down the center of the screen. Yeah. And that sequence ends with Reece Shearsmith Whitehead being absorbed into himself, almost as if the field itself is merging with him. And that makes me wonder if, as part of that scene, the reason that his character seems to be so different, because there is a process of self-actualization. One of the biggest themes, one of the clearest themes that you get through this film is the idea of becoming your own master.
Yes,
Whitehead enters a slave, exits the field as his own man.
Yes,
it's repeated frequently throughout the dialogue, in particular when Jacob's digging the hole for O'Neill. He repeats over and over again, I am my own man, I am my own man. Whereas Friend is completely content with the idea that he is a slave who will only ever do other people's biddings. But that makes me wonder if the Whitehead that we see leave is this other Whitehead. Perhaps there is another Whitehead who absorbs him, or perhaps as part of whatever he went through in the field, the merging of these two personalities allowed him to overcome the fear that he was experiencing, because he's repeatedly called a coward. He calls himself a coward, whereas by the end of it, he's facing O'Neill on like head on almost.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, even then, when I say he does still wait for Friend to get shot again and then shoot O'Neill in the back of the head. So it's not as though he's completely overcome his sneaky and cowardly ways.
Yeah, I very much agree. I think there is a kind of like he passes through a veil and comes out the other side. I mean, because at the end, he comes out. I mean, he kind of comes out like Clint Eastwood. He's the man with no name. He's ruggedized after his experience. And I think when he's defying O'Neill in the last sequence, he says, I can't find the lines in the script, but he's saying to him, "I'm going to become the field." Yeah, I'm going to. He's going to sort of absorb it. They spend so much of their time down on their stomachs crawling through the grass, and we're looking at the bugs, and it's like it's some there's so much in this film.
He eats the mushrooms that are growing in the field, so it's like he's consuming whatever essence that the field is producing as well. And then again, the whole self-actualization, kind of a will to power thing. The last shot of the film is him, Friend, and Jacob standing together, where he's clearly the leader of that trio, where he's in the center, he's the one holding the power, they're his men now. So he has become his own man, he's become the leader.
There was I mean, I love all that stuff. That there's an interpretation of that you were hinting at that I thought we might have a little hand from the director on. Like, as you say, he doesn't want to spell it out. He doesn't want to remove ambiguity. It's almost criminal that we do actually here, but we'll go ahead.
I found the lines, by the way. O'Neill shouts out, "You cannot escape the field, Whitehead." And he shouts back, "Then I shall become it. I shall consume all the ill fortune which you are set to unleash. I shall chew up all the selfish scheming and ill intentions that men like you force upon men like me, and bury it in the stomach of this place."
Beautiful lines. Honestly, the dialogue in this film is excellently written.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Yeah. And something about that animus he expresses in that speech, that reminded me of the stuff that Harry was talking about on the Kill List stream. Men like you force this stuff upon men like me.
Yeah. It's definitely a bit of a shared theme between the two of them.
Yeah, definitely sort of interests of elites and how it's channeled down to the working, to the people doing the action into just basically self-destruction.
It's also said by O'Neill at one point when they first encounter him, and Whitehead's talking to him, and they're talking about their shared master, and how O'Neill has thrown himself away from the master by stealing his documents, which is why he was after him in the first place. And he's saying, "Oh, what is it that you're doing these days?" And Whitehead's like, "Oh, I'm doing lace work. I'm able to do lace work, and I just keep myself in my books." And O'Neill very pointedly says to him, "It seems that our master is keeping you from yourself." This idea that people in this submissive slave role are not just being controlled externally, but internally as well by the people above them.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of hints at that control. I wanted to maybe throw something out there that might not land, but I'll put it out there. There's a little hint from Wheatley it could work, but he throws it out as one of multiple ideas. But we've got something set in a civil war in this liminal space. These people who sort of recurrently clash against each other. And some of the ideas that you picked up, Harry, in the stroboscopic sequence, where the two characters sort of blur together. They're mirrored, they're doubled, they come together, they merge. And at the end, we have Whitehead putting on O'Neill's clothes, kind of integrating that idea, integrating the power of the field as well. There's an idea that, are we looking at a fractured self? Like the Civil War being internal fracture.
Yeah.
Is this someone integrating aspects of himself, you know, when he's the cowardly bit, and that he sort of gives I felt he slipped up in a few moments of dialogue with O'Neill when he says he's learned some new things and he's challenged on it, but he can't be O'Neill, so he says he's doing lace work.
Yeah.
Now, presumably he's actually learned other stuff, but he backs away from it.
This is it. I mean, he's a character who, in Kirk, the guy who writes about the lore of fairies, he's a character who's got what he calls second sight. He's the guy who can, you know, we know he has these kind of. I mean, O'Neill says at one point, you know, I despise you, but you've got these particular talents that you can. And going back to Diane Purkis's stuff, she talks about the Civil War as this kind of place where, you know, masculine identity is being challenged. I mean, this is when I read this stuff and I thought, oh God, this is going to be some feminist author kind of breaking stuff down in a really antagonistic way. But actually, there's something interesting in the way that relates to Whitehead. You know, he has this shameful confession about, well, I've learned how to make lace, very high quality, and O'Neill's lip is curling, and obviously, you know, he's you know, completely dismissive of you know, and I mean, there's this whole sort of
he's almost disgusted by it.
Yeah. I mean, the whole notion of, you know, Whitehead having kind of like fairy-like powers and fairy powers, if you know what the implication is there.
Oh, I see.
You know,
this is Chloe's specialist reading now.
Just rubbing my hands here.
Here we go.
This is my field, if you will.
Yeah. So he is a kind of emasculated kind of literary kind of, you know, dweeb as the film begins, of course, and you know, but he's learned, and he employs his kind of, you know, his special skills kind of come into play in some way, and then he becomes sort of actualized as this kind of very, very masculine kind of figure at the end.
Well, he's certainly got one of those aspects back together, and yeah, I just sort of wonder what else he would have to integrate from the others, but that might not be the way it goes.
Well, there are some in the audience who are pointing out. I think Tricky Menthol is saying that it's ending with the Jungian trinity, mind, body, and soul together as one. So it's kind of the integration of all of the different aspects of himself, which plays into the themes that we're talking about here. He's certainly got the drip down in this picture.
Oh, they made the good case for sort of, you know,
we need to go back to this style of dress. Let's be honest here.
Yeah, this
cape simping. You love to see it.
I mean, the last sequences of the film are just fantastic for that. I mean, anybody can see that Wheatley is channeling a lot of spaghetti western, you know, especially in the sort of climactic music. You've got, you know, it's he kind of like, he puts the black hat on, you know, and he sort of turns kind of, you know, on his heel, and you know, slings the gun over his shoulder, and then, you know, the music is you know, is coming up like bits of Ennio Morricone. You know, it's very similar to a couple of pieces from the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly soundtrack. You know, the Duel and the Vice of Killing. There's a couple of pieces, and another piece from Once Upon a Time in the West, the other Sergio Leone film.
Chronically underwatched film these days. Classic.
Yeah.
And you get the what it is essentially a climactic face-off that the two of them you see, and you see the sacrifices of the side characters as well. On the subject of this technology shock, now seeing as we're talking about the climactic sequences of the film and the brutality that you're talking about of the war, I think Wheatley does pointedly show most of the violence in this film in slow motion to emphasize the brutality of it. And I'm thinking particularly of when Jacob gets shot by O'Neill near the end of the film, when Friend has returned, or perhaps Friend's doppelganger has returned from the dead and draws his attention to him. And then he picks up his musket and fires it back at O'Neill and catches him in the lower leg around the ankle. And you get that disgusting sound effect of his bones crunching and cracking, and you look down, and in slow motion you see that it's taken an enormous chunk out of his leg, and his foot just comes off and he falls to the ground. And I thought that, along with a lot of the other violence in the film, which is it's not constantly violent film, it's only a few piercing moments of violence, it's always very highlighted like that. So perhaps that could do with the technology shock and the new brutality of the Civil War as well, and the technology they were using at the time.
Yeah. It might also be Wheatley's taste, I think. I mean, you're absolutely correct. I think
he is pretty brutal in parts of Kill List, you're right.
I was going to say, I think he's got that taste for, if he's got a low budget, when he uses violence, he wants it to really land. And there's something about, you can have one moment of notorious violence that is more powerful than, you know, any number of forgettable slasher killings. You can make something land. And if they had a budget of £300,000, and I think they clearly put money into that prosthetic, and they wanted it to have an impact, and goodness it did.
And there's also the scenes of O'Neill's face getting blown off, and Cutler, the back of his head getting blown out. And mentioning that on the sort of the Chloe specialist reading that Simon has already pointed us towards, and the fairy, it is quite the imagery of Cutler opening his mouth up wide for O'Neill's gun and having it stuck in his mouth, and then he blows a load out of the back of his head. Let the devil in.
Yeah. Here we go. Choo, choo, choo. We're all hopping on the gay train for this analysis.
There are
before we go any further,
penis shots in this film as well. So it's kind of reminding me of Lighthouse, the Lighthouse, where it's like there's just so much phallic imagery in this film, and you see that. To be fair, you also see the kind of the power dynamics of the characters tends to be reflected by how big the gun they're holding at the time is as well.
Yeah. It's a very visceral film. I mean, it's about bodies in all kinds of ways. You know, there's Jacob taking a crap, and there's farts going on, and there's spitting, and there's coughing, and there's, you know, it's everything about the, you know, the frail mortal qualities of flesh, and yet in this space, the death isn't really real in a sense. I noticed when people, you know, we have a kind of like a feigned death at the beginning, or maybe just, you know, Friend is just unconscious, you know, he's just been knocked out or winded or something, but
or being lazy.
Yeah. But you notice when people die in the film, and one of the things I looked at was I kind of, you know, I freeze framed stuff and looked at stuff. There's something about the way the faces are kind of in films where people are killed, you know, they sort of try to be a bit more grim and gruesome. And I noticed when people die in this film, it just looks like they're asleep. You know, it's kind of like it's like in this field, it's a very gentle death. You just kind of go to sleep, because death isn't real in this particular place. You know, you've got you know, and like when O'Neill gets shot again, that sort of injury. I mean, you'd be screaming. but he just carries on loading and firing away. So there's something about the sort of, the transgression of the body in this field that doesn't quite it doesn't sit completely well with reality. But it is we're very much, as you say, rubbing our noses in it.
Yeah, and on that, Friend's first death after Cutler shoots him about midway through the film as well is there's not much I can add to the analysis of what you've just added there, but he
kind of
extended in comic. It's extended in comic, but it almost seems to be him coming to peace in a way, saying that I've never been surrounded by so many friends before. He's found a belonging, even within these horrible circumstances, within this liminal space. He's found a belonging and togetherness with people that he never experienced before, where he was in the thick of it with these people who were kind of able to empathize with him. And also the dialogue where he's explaining what he wants Jacob to say to his wife is absolutely brilliant. And Jacob's reaction after he says, I've been sleeping with her sister. And he's like, if I'd known that, I'd have respected you. I'd have shown you more respect. I loved it.
Exactly. He finds this new admiration for him because he kind of comes down to the level of the sort of gutter humor that Jacob enjoys.
But also in the kind of willpower and becoming your own man, it shows that he's not just a pathetic slave who goes along with everything. There has been times in his life where he's taken charge of himself and done something outside of what other people have expected him to do. So it ties into that theme as well.
Yeah, it's maybe something it's easy to miss here, but there is great black humor in this film. Like that's a prime example. Just the catching you unawares with you expecting something maudlin, and no, it's fantastic filth.
It's just where he goes, I want you to tell something to my wife. Of course, friend, anything. Tell her I hate her.
Yeah. And that reminded me of Kill List, the tension in that marital relationship. Which and as you say,
remind me, are Amy Jump and Ben Wheatley, they're married, aren't they?
Yeah.
Well, I hope it's a content marriage.
Yeah, well, I don't know. She got the idea for describing the tarmacking in Kill List from somewhere. Hopefully just internet time. But
Sightseers is also, of course, about a dysfunctional and very, very strained relationship where they're constantly trying to kill each other. So there's a funny theme to keep popping up in their work. Maybe this is how they work it all out outside of the household.
Yeah, there's a moment later on. There is a super chat I want to address just quickly. Nilbog, thank you so much for sending in £5. The goal is not registering. Like I set it at just any 10 will do, but it's only counted 2 of the super chats. So I don't know what's going on there. Anyway, thank you for getting us 40% of the way there. Catching up to say what a great modern folk horror. Absolutely. Saw the 10th anniversary screening with Q&A from Shearsmith and Wheatley. Well, if it's a one I was trying to watch, well done, because my link did not work. The website didn't have it. I hope it was useful. I was hoping to hear what they said. So glad you approve, and thank you again for the £5. I wanted to ask about a moment that comes late in the film when fans of Vivarium, if any of you have seen Vivarium 2019, you were expecting this moment. But when they've dug the pit for treasure and found nothing but bones, I mean, I have one reading of this, but there is a moment that's played. I think we could almost see it as a very black joke when they're saying, "Oh, there's no treasure," and Whitehouse says, "No." Whitehead says, "Oh, the true treasure was the friends we made along the way." Basically, I read that as a joke, like quite a knowing.
I
sort
think
of
it's
foppish joke from him.
I think there's more sincerity to it in the film, though.
Okay, that's fair enough.
In terms of what we've been speaking about so far, Friend is able to make connections with people. Whitehead, through the experiences, is able to actualize himself. Even Jacob seems to come out a different man by the fact that he's able to gain this newfound respect for Friend as well. So while it is obviously a bit of a joke, it also is actually there in the film as well.
Yeah. And I think there's a filmmaker's joke as well here. I think there's a bit of that grave is a bit of a setup for another kind of reading here, that we know there's no treasure, but it's kind of becomes apparent. It's easier on a second watching of the film as well, that you kind of work out really what the plot conceit of the film is that O'Neill has set this up, and kind of perhaps knowing there is no treasure, he's getting them to dig a hole, which is going to be all of their graves, because he's got Whitehead coming for these documents that he's trying to retrieve. And actually it kind of almost appears obvious, but in a way I think that's like the filmmaker commenting on us as the audience as well. Like Whitehead, we're kind of trussed up and we're led around, and he kind of the end is just kind of grim, really. The characters are just going to get dumped at the end, and I think he's sort of saying something about the nature of filmmakers and plots, and how you're kind of led by the nose and confused, and you kind of you get binned off at the end. There's something there. It's sort of a filmmaker's joke. I think he had a line that was that I picked up on, that was something I thought that was actually Ben Wheatley talking about himself as the filmmaker here. Let me just see if I can find it. It was oh gosh, what have I done with it?
While you look for it, for Lynch fans, we call this a Gordon Cole moment.
Just on that as well. I understand what your take is with the with the kind of knowing MacGuffin of that being the treasure that they're searching for. But I wonder as well if, given that when they dig the hole, all they find is bones, and it's very explicitly shown at the end of the film as well that Whitehead buries friend and Jacob in there, and then takes on the clothing of O'Neill as well. I wonder if it was pointing to some kind of cyclical theme in the film as well, given that there's this confusion around time and place that's prevalent throughout. If what they're actually finding is the bones of Jacob and O'Neill, or at least a different cycle previously of a different Jacob and a different friend, and this will all happen again.
To me, it was that whole conceit, because of the spaghetti western association I made with it. Have you all seen The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly?
Oh, yes.
Afraid not.
There's this very strong last scene where the trio, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, come together because there's a chase to find some Confederate gold that's buried in a grave in Sad Hill Cemetery. And they get to this place and there's thousands of graves and they don't know where to look. And they have to find this one particular grave. And that's where allegedly the gold will be. And of course they get there, furiously dig up the grave, and there's no gold there. And then they turn on each other and there's a kind of Mexican standoff, because actually the gold is in another grave just next to it, so it's kind of, it's the filmmaker kind of letting you down gently in a way. There is kind of no treasure to be found where you think it's going to be found. There was a line that O'Neill has, and it talked to me about the filmmaker and his relation to audience and his relation to making the act of making film. O'Neill shouts out to Whitehead at one moment. He says, "Sever your conscience from your art, and you will profit." He's saying something about the nature of what he's doing here. He could be doing a kind of straight genre piece here, but he does mix it up in quite an interesting way. And there are these layers of meaning, I think, about about the way that these individuals come together at the beginning of the film. They can be a bit unlikable and a bit sort of tetchy with each other, but by the end, we have this, it almost feels corny, they discover friendship, but actually it's quite moving, and so in a sense, the treasure is kind of, it's like there's a fool's gold that we look for in filmic art sometimes. And yeah, sorry, go on. And it'd be easy for Wheatley just to make a kind of genre piece with a few interesting anachronisms. But that's maybe the point he's at. He's making a film where it's got this purchase and this interest, but they're all film directors are faced with this at some point about do you go commercial next? When you make it big? And as Harry says, he makes High Rise
straight after this, and then he goes on to direct some episodes of Doctor Who.
And I hear people saying about High Rise, they say, yeah, it's kind of It's less charming. It's more by the numbers. It's more.
It feels
technical.
more corporate.
Yeah.
It was sanitized,
Yeah.
very sanitized from the book, and from this we know he's not afraid to have. It sounds like a joke, but the fact that he will have a huge close up on someone's cock, literally warts and all, it tells you something about him that he could not do that in High Rise. There was too much money on that film.
Yeah, well, but if you're also, I find that quite very interesting. The sever your conscience from your art. That again seems very, very Lynchian. Lynch's whole idea of catching the big fish, which is that the ideas come to you. You don't find the ideas. You don't generate the ideas. The ideas are out in the ether, and that seems to speak to the magic that he's speaking of as well. If you're going to take it as a director's commentary, which is that you are simply a conduit to the magic and the ideas that exist out in the ether, and it's through your talent, of course, that you can bring them to life. But you're almost a muse, or the world is your muse, and you simply absorb the sensory information that allows you to bring it to life, rather than trying to rationally fashion something out.
Yeah, he's definitely okay with that. He's very cool with the ambiguity. He's very cool with you just emotionally responding without having to rationalize. I think he would definitely go for that. And I wanted to maybe throw one more thing in here just about the treasure, like noting that we have two shaggy dog tails in this effectively, right? I mean, from the start, the ale house, I'm pretty sure none of us expected the ale house to really be there. It's like, oh gosh, where's the place you have the holiday in Running Man, or the beach in Dark City?
Yeah,
it's pretty obvious from the off that Cutler's having them on.
Yeah,
we knew that. So I think the treasure, we were not expecting that to lead anywhere, but I almost wondered if there was a very hidden meaning in there. I mean, they dig down into the earth, deep down in the earth, and all they find is a skull. Now, we can take a lot from that, but if that's the treasure, I almost wonder, is this a sort of comment about like the treasure of England is its people?
That's a good reading.
Deep in the soil, the blood.
Yeah,
it's that together. That's the treasure.
Well,
in the midst of this civil war, it's worth bearing that in mind.
I'm bringing together that with my fairy reading about this idea that they're in this. People talk about fairy hills and fairy forts. These are the kind of lands where, because the fairies migrated underground, essentially, in a lot of the sort of fairy lore. So again, it's this thing of this analogy for colonization of some kind. We are in their space. How does that feel? Yeah. But the thing about the grave, to me, again, bringing back the good, the bad, and the ugly, to me, that was just about the nature of a power relation between people. There's a famous line in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly where Clint Eastwood's got them at gunpoint, and he tells, the ugly character, Tuco, to dig up the grave for the money. And Tuco says, why should I? And Eastwood has these famous lines saying, you see, in this world, there's two kinds of people, my friend, those with loaded guns and those who dig. You dig. Yeah.
I might have to watch this film.
I can't believe you've not watched it. It's fantastic. It's a classic for a reason.
I think it's definitely...
Sit down, Mr. Never Seen Gladiator.
I'm not a huge Ridley Scott appreciator.
You could have at least had the courtesy to watch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly.
Have you even watched Spaghetti Western?
Mr. Gently Benevolent, thank you for the controversial sending $5 supporting the goal. Yes, we are 5 away from the bonus stream. If I'll just count them because I've messed up the YouTube side, clarifying that Harry is second best Spice Girl since Bo Spice upped his game. Ooh.
Well, everybody's entitled to their opinions, whether they're correct or not.
Yeah. Oh, thank you, Mr. GB. Controversial one. We do like Bo, though. I'd love to get him on, but I don't know what film I'd give him.
Bo's great, and he does love talking about media as well. He's even put himself through some pretty terrible media just for the sake of being able to appear on Mr. H's streams
guy,
as
by the
well.
way. Nice
Oh,
guy.
he's absolutely lovely, really wonderful guy. So I'm sure. I mean, if you want, I can ask him tomorrow if he what he might be interested in watching. You can see if
I'd
he's
be
never
curious.
watched
We
it before.
chatted briefly in the office, and I just thought, yeah, he'd said he'd like to come on. And I just thought I have no idea what to give him. So yeah, maybe find out.
Probably, I'd recommend something in some historical basis. Something that he can dig his history.
Oh no, what have we done? He should have been on this one. Never
Oh
mind.
bloody hell, you're right. Actually,
dead.
To be fair, I don't know the kind of films that he watches typically, so I don't know if this might have been something that he would have enjoyed, or if he'd have just come on and been very straightforward and said, "No, it's nonsense. I hate it."
I did. Sorry, Simon. This is going way back a bit, but I worried if I missed that, I had to sort the cat out. But when you were talking about, was it Dinah Perkis's?
Dinah Perkis, yeah.
Thank you.
Dinah Perkis,
Did she talk about the how to remove someone from a mushroom ring? Did you cover that?
No, that's interesting. How's that?
So I mean, my research may be off, but I just wanted to get this in here because there's some great imagery for how O'Neill rises from the earth, and I'm kicking myself that I never noticed that the rope unwinds the wrong way. That is an amazing catch. But the mythos that I think Wheatley cited was that people are trapped inside a mushroom ring. That's the other realm, what you might call fairy space.
Yeah.
But you can pull them out via a rope.
Yes.
And I think that's where they're explicit. That seems to be where they're retrieving O'Neill from.
Yes. It's when you look at the composition. I don't know if you have the shot of O'Neill on the ground where he's kind of after he's been pulled out and he's kind of sprawled, and there's a lot of kind of risen Christ kind of imagery. I'd say there's an element of resurrection stuff in this film.
I don't have that, but I do have this. He is just, you are left with the question of what are they pulling out? Where are they pulling it from?
Yeah.
You never see it until he's just there.
Yeah.
Which is just wonderfully uncanny. Like, as you've said, our physics do not apply in this space.
Exactly. I mean, there's a shot I was thinking of in particular. You can see it's kind of like a medium shot where he's lying sort of in the center of the frame, and just diagonally back from that, there's a kind of an area of very pale grass, and the rope kind of leads back to that. It's like a little sort of a little bleached area that he's been, and the rope is like some kind of umbilical that he's been pulled out with, because I think there's definitely a sort of birthing element about this film that comes in. I mean, certainly, Perkis has got lots of these implications in the way that the fairy world. She points out it's a matriarchy. It's the fairy queen. It's because these are the elements of kind of inversion that you have in fairyland. I mean, you literally have a shot actually during the sort of trip sequence where we have a completely inverted Whitehead lying in the grass, but he flips the shot. So it's completely upside down, yeah, and you have this thing, as I say, with O'Neill, where a number of times he's kind of sort of battered and sort of semi-naked, and his hair's kind of flowing, and he appears as a kind of Christ-like figure, as he's been sort of birthed, like via this rope pulling.
I hadn't thought of him in that line. I mean, I like the umbilical reading, and the inversions I noticed lots of. I mean, the obvious one is the bit where he's told he's taken prisoner, and Whitehead is just absolutely going, no, it is I who have taken you prisoner. Not the other way around. You have it confused, but. Yes, we reverse and flip things multiple times.
He literally says, O'Neill, at one point, the world is turned upside down, Whitehead, and so is its pockets.
Nice. I think this is going to really reward a second viewing. Just to try and catch so many things that are clearly there in it. It's wonderfully done.
There's a thing I'd like to talk about, if I can.
Please
so Perkis talks about, it's an interesting little interview. She talks about English fantasy and about, she's talking about Oxford because she's based at Oxford and so on. And she talks about, people like C.S. Lewis and Tolkien and the way a lot of the fantasy literature centers around Oxford. And it's an interesting conversation. And she goes on to talk about one of the interesting things is our seasonal differences. Because she's actually, she's British, but I think she lived for a long time in Australia. And she talks about, again, like I talked about, this sort of endless day that they have, this kind of thing that she notices, that our horror and our fantasy is very centered around this kind of good versus evil mythology, which is very much expressed in the way that she noticed how when you come to England in the summer, the light goes on till 10 o'clock at night. So summer is literally a place of light, and the winters are very long and very dark. So our internalized metaphysic about storytelling very much brings things into light versus darkness discussions. And that's why this film, you have it in, I wouldn't want to see it in color. I love it in black and white, because what you really notice is light. There are some color shots of the cast out on the set, which you see, and sort of amazing red costumes and things that they've got, but it's just not needed, because the thing you really grasp about the film is this overwhelming sense of light.
Yeah, it lets them play with it a lot. There's good chiaroscuro in here, but overwhelming, yes, it's very bright, but I think done with the knowledge that they want to save the contrast for later. So for instance, when O'Neill is fully done up in black, and for another moment, oh gosh, I don't know if I'll just show the image rather than doing the analysis on it. But
yeah, I was going to go into this.
Yeah, you focus so much on good light that really stands out.
What do you make of that? What do you make of that?
This, I think it's a wonderful moment of foreshadowing, and I think it sort of supports my psychological integration of a fractured self theory. So we're shown this mysterious image, folks, if you haven't seen the film, just to make sense of this weird smoky orb. Anyone watching the stream, I won't read.
That's pretty clear-pilled analysis right there. Let's be honest.
No comment.
I think we've unlocked it.
No comment. Okay, so if you haven't seen the film, at 2 points, I believe it, Whitehead looks into the sky, sees this smoky orb that increasingly takes up his whole center of vision. I'm really drawn to the idea of the smoke in it, like the literal fog of war, the cannon smoke. But he sees it twice. He sees it coming, and then after the battle with O'Neill, where he's taken on O'Neill's stuff, his equipment, we get a little clue. He gets O'Neill's scrying mirror. He holds it up to the sun, and he's bringing it together. And what he would see when he brings it together would look like that black sun. That's a good name for it. That black sun in the sky, which O'Neill had also said he saw like unclarity, shadows in, etc. This was a foreshadowing of him integrating O'Neill, taking his stuff, and then using the glass to see forward. Although I wonder, since they seem unable to actually escape the field, if the scrying is going to be much use. But that's what I think that the giant black orb was for.
See, on my first viewings of the film, and of course it is kept very, very ambiguous what's going on towards the end as well, I always assumed that while there was no treasure, that whatever was going on, because if he simply wanted to get them to dig a hole and then kill them so that he could put them in the hole so they've buried their own graves, I mean, he didn't need to go through the entire ritualistic process of the possession of Whitehead There was no need to have all of these documents there to begin with. It seems a very, very roundabout way of getting them to dig their own graves when he clearly already has magical powers and already has Cutler on his side, and so could just force them to do that without having to go through all of this. So what I always assumed was that whether or not there's any treasure below the ground, and we see, of course, that it's just the skull and bones, that this was all part of some larger ritual that perhaps O'Neill was trying to draw some great darkness into the world through this other realm that they exist within the field, and that black orb emerging was part of that. That was the darkness approaching them. That was my takeaway. That was my interpretation after a few times watching the film. Years and years and years ago. And I do still think that there is probably something to that, because obviously he's got the scrying mirror for a reason, perhaps looking into the future, given that so much of the film seems to be on the technology of warfare. Perhaps it's presaging the even more bloody and gruesome wars to come, say, when technology is advanced even further, come to 20th century warfare, perhaps. Perhaps that's the kind of darkness that he's bringing into the world, is the further escalation of warfare, which is why what they ultimately find is the bones in the ground. All there is to come from all of this is more death, so to speak.
Any take on it yourself, Simon?
Yeah.
The huge orb?
Yeah, I think that's very reasonable what Harry's saying. I can't sort of, I can't break out of that explanation in terms of, whether O'Neill's doing it as a kind of, he's got some other intent in mind. It's just pure sadism to me. He is kind of this idea of the devil. It's even, it's alluded to in one of the black jokes, isn't it? That friend says, I didn't know the devil was an Irishman. I sort of expected him to be a bit taller. That was the sort of setup for what O'Neill is. He's just this force of pure sadistic evil. But the thing I felt about the black sun, it sort of went back to early in the film, because when I saw the image, I have to say it reminded me of the kind of close-up microscopic images you see of a cell mitosis in a human egg, and the reason I sort of made a sort of connection with that is I was looking earlier, the scene where Whitehead is he's tortured and he comes out of the tent and he's all trussed up, and he's been made into, as O'Neill says, a kind of divining rod. He's been made into like an automata. And there's a line early on in the film that the Julian Barrett character
have we mentioned that Julian Barrett's in this for all of 2 minutes and immediately killed?
Yeah, which is what a waste. But he among the insults he's throwing at Whitehead, he says, "Your privy parts are doomed, homunculus." And what O'Neill has created when we see Whitehead come out of the tent all trussed up is he's effectively created what is a homunculus. A homunculus was a sort of popular concept in alchemy in the 16th and 17th century, that you would basically take the sperm of a man and kind of keep it in a gourd, and then put it in a sort of a horse womb or something like that, some sort of, horrible kind of process. But essentially you would make a kind of little human that you could control. That would be the homunculus, and the homunculus, it says that the fully grown homunculus was supposedly greatly skilled in, quote, art, and could create giants, dwarves, and other marvels. As through art they are born, and therefore art is embodied and inborn in them, and they need learn it from no one. So they become this kind of this sort of knowledgeable automaton. It can find knowledge, it can seek through space and time, and that's what he becomes. He becomes this tool, this homunculus. And then it comes to this moment at the end, and it is kind of in part of a process in the trip sequence of him kind of being reborn from the field. That's as I sort of took it to be. So there was this conjunction between these ideas of, what who has the line early on the film about, it's Jacob has the line about, there's a singular lack of women at this party. Obviously
yes, he says what this party is missing is the civilizing effect of women.
Yeah. And
I think it's during that you can hear the screams of Whitehead, where it's left completely ambiguous as to how it is that O'Neill has put him into this state of possession.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you brought us close to it earlier, Harry, and we managed to sidestep it. But I feel we're sort of drawn into the pull of the obligatory gay reading.
Speaking of which, I think the gay reading, I might have a new idea, a Douglas Murray idea of what the big black hole is supposed to represent.
Oh no!
I'm sorry, guys.
Do tell.
Tell you what, I will lower the tone even further quickly,
Yeah.
just to note that this is, of course, for Reece Shearsmith fans, the second film he's been in featuring a homunculus. The first, of course, being The League of Gentlemen's Apocalypse, of which I believe I'm probably the only brother who ever saw that film. But, can't recommend it, to be honest.
I think my missus has watched it, so whenever you end up meeting her, because she's watched the full thing, including the films and the specials that they've done, so you can speak to her about it.
Two of us. Yay. Oh my gosh, the full fan reunion.
Another.
Oh, no, Patrick Batman also watched it. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
So, terrible bit of trivia. So, when this happens, and I think we're possibly getting a little hint of I Walked with a Zombie here, the sort of more Haitian zombies where they're trussed up with the ropes. But I could be I don't think it's impossible Reece Shearsmith knows of that movie. We're talking back to, was that 1936? I could be wrong. That might be White Zombie. But very old. He could be referencing that, but he comes up with this manic grin. But just before that, I think the idea of the come into the tent, when he summoned in, this genuinely freaked me out. This was a horrific sequence. It was really living up to the actual horror in folk horror. The fact that they did not show us what was going on there, but I really got the vibe that there was a bit of the old Tory party conference activity being forced upon Whitehead.
Yeah. A bit of Tom Harwood's Weekend going on in there.
Oh yeah, bit of spadding.
Yeah,
got absolutely spadded.
Well, it's funny because when Whitehead does his little expositional speech at the beginning, there's that lovely scene where he's lying in the grass with Friend. It's actually a really beautifully played, naturalistic scene, and Friend says, so what do you do? And he's basically a researcher by modern terms, isn't he? He says, I pick bits of data together for these kind of great men. What does he say? It's oh God, I've got so many notes on. I can't find it. Hang on. No, yeah. He talks about where has it gone? Oh, I can't find it. Damn. Hang on. Where have I gone? Yeah, okay. So that's it. He talks about he's charged with gathering sundry details, compilations of almanacs and charts. He is kind of like a classic, data analyst.
Back in the day. I mean, that's another bit of liminality here, is we are somewhere between the scientific and the magical. It's another, they're piecing it together. But I just thought that this scene, the ambiguity again of what was going on was amazing, very affecting. And then for this to come out, this scene where he comes out with haunting music, an absolute, I would say, sort of a manic, ecstatic expression. It really, how can I say, it could completely lose an audience. It's a lot to take, but they hold it with such confidence.
Yeah.
That what could be goofy, I think, wins you over.
Yeah. I think Wheatley talks about this in the commentary. It's one of those things, as he says, he didn't know what he was going to do, and you watch the sequence and you think this could land flat on its face. It just might not work. But then there's a commitment to it that, as you say, just his expression, the sort of eyes upturned, the sort of demented glee. And then, the next bit where they're doing the Ring of Roses and running him around the field manically. It's kind of a sort of one of those brave moments for filmmaking where you commit to something and you go through with it. And then you run the footage completely. You don't try and cut it or dodge it. You run the whole thing, and the actor's performance is what's made it. And I really sort of got a lot of respect for Reece Shearsmith from this film.
He fully committed to the role in this, and that sequence that you just mentioned, the Ring of Roses as well, is one that I think for most people, and I've seen it myself when I've shown this film to my missus, is when the music first kicks in, the little childish flute rendition of Ring of Roses kicks in, and they're all running around. It got a little bit of a laugh. She was like, "Oh God, this is ridiculous now." But then the scene doesn't end. It goes on for a few minutes, and the more the scene goes on, the more committed it gets, the more it begins to unnerve people. It gets that initial shock reaction of, "Oh God, this is jumping the shark," to, "Oh God, something really unnatural and horrible is going on."
Yeah. It's great bathos in that sense of, you have this scene which is kind of ecstatic, in this slowed down way with this great music playing, and then you jump to the from the sublime to the ridiculous with the Ring of Roses. But the expression on his face, I tried sort of closing up on it, and I thought it's the Kubrick Jack Torrance stare.
You're right. Yes, if he only had him staring directly down the camera, this is the Kubrick stare. You're right. It's in Shining. It's in Barry Lyndon. It's in Full Metal Jacket. It's in most of his films, really.
Yeah.
And we've also got another uncanny inversion of just like the rope. Like, there's no reason for O'Neill to be in the tent with the rope just out, but it just makes it that much weirder.
It's like a weird birth, isn't it?
Yeah, and it flips up from obviously how
tent,
parting.
The tent. It also
And
makes the interior of the tent scene completely unnatural, because it makes it feel as though there's a larger space in there than there should be, to my eyes.
Yeah. That's like the weird sense of the field as well, that you kind of don't know its limits, and it kind of doesn't have any in terms of time or space. And as you say, he kind of lolls on his bed in the tent we see in one short bit, but you do get, when you hear the screams, you're thinking, have they got enough space to actually, make somebody scream like that? I suppose they have.
Did you notice? I don't know how to phrase this. I felt the tent behaved in a really weird way, or they reacted to it in a really weird way. As in, I would have thought they would have seen it ages ago, like from a long distance. There's nothing else in this field. They'd have seen it and gone straight to it, but they sort of walk into frame with it and then just react to it then, like it didn't react until it just came into their view.
This is what I was speaking about earlier when they're pulling the rope. It seems to appear with O'Neill, and with the turning of the unwinding of the rope going the wrong way, it seems more that they've been pulled into where O'Neill wants them, rather than them pulling him into their realm. He's pulled them further into his realm, wherever he's been hiding out in this between space.
I really like that interpretation now. I wish I'd thought of it, Harry.
Well, you can pass it off as your own, secondhand as it may be.
Excellent. I am checking my notes. I don't think I had an extra thing on that. And looking at the stills and just seeing if we have anything else. I suppose we'd be remiss if we didn't discuss a bit more of the. I mean, we sort of discussed the stroboscopic sequence quite a lot. I don't want people to feel we shortchanged them on that. And I was going to ask. I had a note to ask about Friend just reappearing, but I think you've done a wonderful explanation of that with the. Well, we could get to it a couple of ways. Yeah, we could do the. Did you say double walker? All I thought was doppelganger.
Yeah. Well, it is the same. It is effectively the doppelganger. But the kind of the nature of fairy lore allows for these kind of seeming, impossibilities to occur. That there are these doubles and maybe even triples by the end of the film. Because Friend is effectively killed twice. But people exist in this kind of fairy space. With their doubles just ready to be pulled in as needed. And there's a kind of a different there's a different interesting relationship, isn't there, when Friend is kind of revived for the second time. He gives their position away, and Jacob turns on him, and so there's a different kind of tension. You think, is he the same Friend, you know, that was there before? And again, that's reflected in fairy lore, that the doppelgangers don't necessarily have quite the same character as the person who is. I mean, because very often in fairy lore, the real person, the real human, is abducted to work in the fairy world, and the doppelganger that walks around on Earth is kind of a slightly, you know, it's like the relationship between Superman and Bizarro. You know, the person that's left to wander around Earth is maybe kind of hollowed out in some way.
Well, it also, strangely enough, reminds me of the way that the alien invasion is working in the last of the Cornetto trilogy, The World's End. Yeah, but
very underrated.
It's also could tie into more of the imagery of regarding the scrying mirror, because obviously the scrying mirror is its own magical object, but it is also a mirror, which by this point in the film has been split in half. So it could just be a very nice classic filmic symbolism of the cracked and broken mirror representing the cracked, broken character. And then, of course, it coming together, again, the integration, the synthesis with the magic of the field. And the end of this sequence as well, when he is merging into himself, the sound effects, the fleshy grinding that you hear behind it as well, that got possibly the biggest grimace of the whole film out of me, because when he's merging into his own head, it made me cringe. Even though the image itself is not gruesome, the brilliant use of sound effects made it gruesome.
Absolutely. You know, at the end, there's another possible bit of imagery that we should bring in. I hate to sully the stream with it, but Stephen King's The Dark Tower might also give us a little extra way of explaining some a seasoning on our analysis so far. I don't know if there are any Dark Tower readers here. Anyone doesn't want to be spoiled on a thing that ended quite a while ago, but there's that also has this long meandering quest in it, and infamously, when the man in black is able to reach his destination, infamously after 7 books, he kind of ends up back at the start again, but just with a tiny bit more knowledge in his head.
Oh, I bet fans were satisfied with that ending.
To his credit, Stephen King sort of gives you an ending. You know, Roland's been trying to reach the Dark Tower. He had a fight. Now he's there. There you go. And then he has like an author's note saying, there's more if you want, but I'd advise you not to keep reading. And then if you ignore that, you can then read what's actually inside the tower and be furious. And I did actually throw my copy of the book across the room.
To be fair,
I have warmed to it since, you know.
At least he finished his 7-book fantasy series, unlike other notorious writers who are very fat and soon to die.
True. I mean, came back and added, I believe, 2 further entries right into the middle of the narrative. Why not?
Well, that's
just to
nice
dab.
That's nice when an author does that after the series is already finished. The author I'm referring to likes to do that before he's finished the main novels. But I'm not bitter. I'm not bitter.
No, I've got to be careful. Like I rushed that series of novels. I got into it. I was focused on those for years, and then just I mean, it is currently 15 years since the last one was published.
14.
14.
I started frequently at my old job looking up in 2016 every week. Winds of Winter update. Nothing.
Yeah.
And that's almost 10 years ago.
I remember some of the deep fan sites, people taking bets. What do you reckon? Like he said it's half done. You know, realistically, come on, he's rounding stuff off. It's going to be quicker. What do you reckon? 2013, guys? And then I was laughing at the people saying, nah, 2016 at earliest.
I remember people thinking
at the earliest.
Playing some 4D chess, and the end of Series 8 would end with him releasing winds and spring at the same time, because that was what was taking him so long. He wanted to do a double release.
Oh, exactly. Yeah, he didn't want to promise
was
it again.
thick in the air.
I was almost there. I almost believed it. Like, yeah, why not? There's no rush. He wants to get a head start. Of course he does. Yeah, yeah. Hey, look, he's released about 9 chapters, so he must be pretty far in it.
Yeah, 9 chapters that were holdovers from Dance with Dragons.
Yeah. Simon, have you ever been drawn into? Are you a member of the embittered and, well, I wouldn't say embittered. I mean, I stopped caring a long time ago. I just occasionally think, like, gosh darn it, he's still not published.
Sure would be nice if he finished that series. Sure would be nice.
No, I'm not familiar with any of this.
Fair enough. Tricky Menthol, almost as bad as Patrick Rothfuss. True.
Can I just put some religion into
Scott
this?
Lynch also. Oh, please do. Please. It's Holy Week after all.
I was going to say there is a thing, as I say, I've alluded to sort of themes of rebirth, resurrection in this space, and there's some interesting things about the sort of the wooden stake, the capstan thing that they wind the rope around.
Yes.
There's a very quiet line. You can miss it unless you sort of read the script. But Friend talks about it. He sort of sniffs it and says it's rowan wood, which rowan is thought to be the fairy tree in magic lore. I also think of the kid called Rowan in The Wicker Man actually as well. Now you come to think of it. But the thing about the fairy as well is Perkis talks about this. The fairies is a special category of the dead as well. Dead people often taken before their time, and people who die in battle. And there's a thing that you alluded to almost at the beginning of the stream, actually, that there's a reading here that these people have all died in battle. They've all kind of escaped from the battle, and exist in this world where, like fairies, they don't kind of go until they need to. They kind of still hover in this realm. But there's an interesting thing that she says as well about, obviously this is a time where, you've got this very aggressive form of Protestantism, Puritanism, I suppose, is something she describes as where Protestantism is a kind of form of religion that takes away agency from the laity. Under the old religion, under Catholicism, you can do things like go on pilgrimage. You can have special prayers for special problems. You can light a candle and make a donation. You've got all these kind of bits of arcana in the religion. And Protestantism is a more managerial kind of credo. And it says, you're going to lose all that stuff, but we'll give you a kind of intellectual coherence in Protestantism. It's very much a kind of managerial religion. It rejects things like fairies, because the kind of fairy lore, that old stuff, kind of sort of, to an extent, coexisted with Catholicism. It was like those little bits of Catholicism that gave people a bit of comfort. When babies died in childbirth, often people were told, well, your baby's gone to live with the Queen of the Fairies, and that sort of gave people the sense that world wasn't that far away, because the idea of the fairies was, they lived around us. I mean, they would come into the house at night, classically, and, tidy up. And then this is all part of the serious fairy lore that Kirk talks about in the 17th century. So they have this relation to us. They're not like us. They have a different sense of property rights, is what one commentator mentions, is that they'll pilfer stuff off us if they want to, but they're not actively hostile. But we have to kind of respect their space, if you see what I mean. We don't invade their areas. But as I say, this thing of they're being chased away, and at this point, in our history, the sort of forceful form of mercantilist Protestantism is taking over, and it's shoving all this stuff out the way. So
taking a lot of the colour out as well, infamously. Yeah. I mean, my history is not great on this, but yes, it's one of the tragedies was the, even as someone who goes to a C of E church, the destruction of the religious murals and the art to make it more plain.
Yes, I mean,
iconoclasm. Tragic,
Yeah, iconoclasm is a factor in the Civil War. It's thought that at one point, one of the battles is lost because some images have been smashed in the churches in the area. And that is read as a sort of omen that that goes in the favour of the parliamentarians, I think, or something like that. So they're very conscious of the destruction of image, and that's why I talked about seeing as a theme in this film. You know, the close-ups of irises and eyes and lenses as well, as we've talked about in many different ways. Whitehead looking through the magnifying glass at the sort of postulated penis, and you know, the iris in the sky that looks like the black sun, and you know, the whole art of filmmaking, the sort of distortions in lenses. Wheatley talks about playing around with lots of, you know, odd little lenses and stuff to make some of these interesting effects, where there's sort of this soft focus and there's very deep focus shots as well. But as I said, there's this whole theme of how you read this reality, and how that links to the kind of the sort of gross materialism represented by people like O'Neill, you know, who come in and literally put it in sexual terms. You know, I'm just going to rape a corner of this country. Sorry, I said the word.
That's all right. Well, you also talked about the world's upside down and its pockets are.
Yeah.
Basically, yes, pure materialism. Just there's all the magic, but it's just a means to acquire.
Totally micking out.
Yeah. So there's this idea that, you know, again, with the fairies, there's also this idea that they are the restless dead, you know, that they coexist with us. And the restlessness, if you want to go Freudian, is a kind of a projection on our part. It's actually, you know, the dead are not restless. It's us who are restless about people we lose. Grief makes us restless. But the fairies are that embodiment of that, which is why, as she says, Perkins, fairy lore is quite sticky in culture. And there's been this kind of revival of interest in this sort of space that, again, it's not defined by these twee images of fairies that you have in Disney films. It's they're kind of like, you know, they're sort of like our predecessors in some ways. They live with us. They're around us. They're in the kind of margins and gaps and the spaces that we don't see. But they're kind of benign in a way, and, you know, they can be punishing in other ways as well. You know, if we tread on them.
Yeah, there's a I'm lowering the tone again, but it kind of links us to something that I really hoped we could get to towards the end. For some of the research you've done, Simon, the fairy world gets brought up very much in another series called Outlander, which is focused around sort of Jacobite rebellion initially. It talks about fairies in a very similar way, in the way that they can be, you know, in the modern lens, some famous are there to help process a difficult issue. But there's very interesting discussion about how that's a living custom right alongside the Catholicism, which was great. But I mean, I'm not exactly saying it's high quality. Outlander is femme slop of the highest quality, where the author has written a protagonist who, oh, whoops-a-daisy, he's yet again having to go under a classic female fantasy, but it's absolutely not her fault. She has been forced to marry the Scottish hunk, and etc., etc.
It's interesting you mentioned
he's spanking her for plot reasons, but she's not into it, bro. Very interesting series.
It's interesting you mentioned the Jacobite connection. Of course, I mentioned to you that you know, there's a couple of inspirations that Wheatley has in making the film, and one is this docudrama Culloden about the ending of the Jacobite rebellion. And in a way, there's a strong parallel again to the fairy lore. He has this very powerful sequence at the end of the film where he talks about the way the clans assembled, fought the English, and were just crushed. And the English then went on to kind of strip them of their lands, populate them with sheep, and destroy their culture, you know, forbid the wearing of the Highland tartan, forbid the carrying of the weapons, forbid the language. And in that way, he explains, a people are destroyed. And again,
play some clips of it now, just because it was a great thing to link. I found that section heartbreaking.
Very, and Wheatley does a similar thing with these close-ups on faces. I mean, it's very Sergio Leone. You know, he does this in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. These weather-beaten faces, and you just kind of read the histories in them. And the other film, the one Winstanley, where that was another inspiration for him as well, talking about the Levellers who came after the sort of period of Field in England, who were kind of like a proto-communist movement who tried to return to the land, and again they were sort of chased off. So there's this theme. I don't know what their politics are, the Wheatleys, but there's a little bit of a sort of concern for the people, I guess, at some level.
Definitely. Yeah, I think they, how can I say, that they like the visual style of it, but I think you would be watching it because probably you do have a bit of a sympathy for it. And I think that idea about how, you guys might mock me for this, but I think the idea of how the elites can absolutely wreck the lives of the regular person, I think we can all get behind that. It's pretty boring just saying this thing's a leftist issue, this thing's a rightist issue. Only centrist good boys get to have this concern.
It doesn't have to be a Marxist thing or anything like that. Class dynamics exist whether you're a Marxist or not, and it's okay to accept them. It's some of the most interesting right-wing thinkers have acknowledged them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like class definitely exists. Someone like Carlyle.
Yeah, and it's interesting that Wheatley makes this specificity, even if there's vagary in the plot. It's a field in England. He wants to talk about that, and but for time, again, you can go deeper into, the themes. The sort of allegory of these characters. The bit where they're fighting in the grave. I think one of them says to the other, "I'm going to be a better slave than you."
Yes, I think Friends says that. Yeah,
and you get that sort of sense of they're kind of these, avatars of like the working class in a way. The toff is up the top, holding the gun on them, and the other toff is.
It's not even the toff. It's
exactly
henchmen.
And
they're almost like the lumpen proletariat who they're happy or at least Friend is happy in his slavery. He's accepted it. He's happy to be pushed about by those above him.
Whereas Jacob is like, I am my own master. I am my own man. Is that what he says?
Yes. Yeah. He tries.
Yeah, it's like I'm going to work my way out of this, but his whole work is digging a hole. Like he can only get further into his situation.
Yeah, but he tries to reclaim something. He sort of does it in that angry fury to try and get himself, because he's obviously furious at the situation, and he tries to re-dignify himself. And he's palliated with booze or sex and stuff in the rest of his life, but he sort of shrugs it off in the sense in the end, because he kind of breaks as a man as well.
And it's immediately after that, after Friend gets shot, that he begins weeping when he realizes this friend of his. Whereas Jacob, every scene before that, like you say, he shrugged everything off. He shrugged off all of the diseases that Whitehead finds in him. And it really does sound like a Mr. Burns situation, where he's just so full of disease that they're all holding each other back from killing him. But at that point, he allows himself to break. He's been a very gruff and masculine character. But you see this person who is ultimately very innocent in Friend die, kind of for his own fault, and it breaks him a little bit. It's a very funny scene, but also a very tender moment.
Yeah. I think that's kind of nice, actually. I think it can be. It's easy to see it as soppy in what Wheatley's doing. In what Wheatley's doing. But I liked it. I liked there is no treasure. There is something more important, and what you said, Chloe, about finding ourselves at the bottom of the hole.
Yeah, very much so. Locating ourselves there in the heritage. It's not flashy, but it's real and it's tangible and it matters.
Yeah. So who knows?
Is that his politics? I don't know, but I've not seen anything that has made me go, oof, don't fancy that.
I said that there was something about Kill List, about the way these guys are kind of basically in the end abused by elites and destroyed.
Oh, yes. Manipulated by forces larger than them, out of their view that they never had any say in.
Yeah. To add to your, if no one has seen it, watch our stream on Kill List. I was very happy with that one, but I never
also
got to
watch Kill List.
True. I didn't really think of this properly in our stream, so I might as well get it out now. And apologies, Simon, I said this in DMs, but I'll just repeat it now.
No.
Because I never got to add this, and it's not worth its own video yet, or rather, I don't have time to make it because it's basically full on allotment season, and my daughter deserves a lot of attention. But basically, we highlighted a lot in Kill List that there was so much doubling and foreshadowing. So imagery that would set up for something that we would see later, and that would be in the home life. There would be something we would encounter on the assassination missions. And I thought, okay, that's some cool foreshadowing. That's nice. It's eerie. And then I thought, given how all the involvement ends up reflecting back on the guys and making their lives worse, it's like this idea that the work that the people are being recruited to do is actually just reflecting back on them. And that becomes really, that actually happens at the end. But it felt like a stand-in for all the work that you are sold to the elites as like a solid mission. Like, this is good. And Kill List was done in 2011. So I am really thinking that maybe something like the messiness of Iraq and Afghanistan were very much on people's minds. This idea that you go and do this thing, you've got this righteous cause you've been given, or this work you've been given, but actually all that damage you do actually comes straight back into your home.
Well, I mean, the characters in Kill List are also, they're either ex-army or ex-special forces as well, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I thought it was an astute observation. Like, these are the people who, things like a really easy example. Oh, all this horrible terrorism situation, terrible. We need anti-terror laws, and we're locking you up with them. It's like, oh, okay. Yeah. So just for one example, I think that's the sort of thing that was on Wheatley's mind, that you do all these quests abroad, but actually your own neighborhood gets worse and the government just has more power over you. So I don't know. I wouldn't trivialize Wheatley by shoving him into the left or shoving him into the right or whatever. I just think he's on the right track.
Yeah, it's like the way I feel about the Adam Curtis stuff. He's kind of left liberal, but the stuff in there, he himself defies being, constrained by that. And there's themes that are just you can't kind of contain them under the rubric of straight ideological leftism or anything like that. There's provocative questions, and there may be provocative answers, but he is leaving you to make that interpretation, which I think makes it worthy art.
Again, like said in the film that you highlighted earlier, if you take your subconscious out of the art, you find the real art there. And I think it's good that an author, a director like Wheatley, presumably, given everything that we're saying, isn't going into these films with a direct message that he's trying to tell. He's going in with an artistic vision that's come to him, him and Amy Jung as well. And then, his artistic vision is imprinted onto.
Yeah. Sever your conscience from your art and you will profit.
And so just looking through his IMDb page, and it's really, it's really sad, because this was basically, this was his last hurrah. This was his last hurrah. There's Kill List, Sightsee, this, and then High Rise, which I didn't really, it was okay. And then Free Fire, which I didn't watch, but heard was, again, quite middling. And since then, what have we got since then? Happy New Year, Colin Bursted, which actually has the same actor as the main character from Kill List. So that might be interesting.
Neil Maskell, no.
Yeah, and then it's like the most recent things he's done, Meg 2, and last year he directed an episode of a series called Generation Z.
Yeah.
It's a zombie show.
I've got a feeling like Christopher Smith, it's a similar, it kind of got absorbed into the system a bit, or you just sort of have to pay you got to pay the bills. Yeah.
Well, actually,
that's
dues.
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 Yeah.
Yes.
I'm just looking at this description for Generation Z. Actually, this looks like it could be some prime slop right here. Danbury, where a chemical leak outside a care home starts an apocalypse led by old-age pensioners hungry for human flesh. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to lie. That's kind of a hook.
Yeah.
That's a little bit of a hook right there.
Could be a nice bit of slop. He's done In the Earth as well, which looks kind of appealing. I mean, it's got Reese. Why can't I say it? Reese Shearsmith in it as well. That's what I'll try it. I mean, it's not rated well, but I'm interested.
To be fair, this isn't rated well. Most of his films aren't rated very well on IMDb because the plebs have access to it.
Yeah.
No Amy Jump though. Interesting.
I mean, as Harry says, maybe he's got a conscious awareness at this point that his career is going to, have to choose to go down certain tracks. I mean, one of the influences they mentioned on the commentary was a film called El Topo by Alejandro Jodorowsky, which is, I've never seen it. I've seen one Jodorowsky film. I saw Santa Sangre, I remember, at university, which is a very bizarre film. But El Topo is kind of like, it's sort of like a metaphysical spaghetti western, so it's quite an interesting thing there. But you can see clearly some of the images, the man in the black hat, and the cloak striding away over the landscape, have been an influence on Wheatley. And maybe it's this point where he kind of says, well, that's my art house phase done, now I guess you just need to, show me in budget and I'll just do whatever you want.
Yeah, the BBC's knocking to direct a couple of crap episodes of Doctor Who. Well, they'll pay them. I was so disappointed when I was watching those Peter Capaldi episodes and Ben Wheatley's name popped up in the credits as director. Yeah, because it just looked like any other Doctor Who episode. Clearly, he was director for hire, entirely studio managed. It was horribly. Yeah. Why would you get someone who's clearly got a visionary perspective and just get him to do everything by the numbers routine? It's so disappointing.
And maybe that's where he's invested in the character of Whitehead, Wheatley, Whitehead, it's kind of a sort of a farewell to this kind of high principle. I mean, doesn't O'Neill say at one point, he says, oh, you're just an envelope. He's like, sort of
yes, he spits the prunes out.
You're just a receptacle. It's kind of, again, it's another sexual sort of metaphor. Yeah, but it's humiliating, So, you're just a conveyancer for message as a film director. And maybe this is a point where he's got a realization that, maybe the last time you get to make a film like this, which I think has, genuine artistic brilliance and merit. And it's, as you say, it rewards repeated viewings and has a lot of depth, which is not just there in the sense of derangement in the imagery, even though I find that quite enjoyable. There is something more to it. And I think Wheatley presents a kind of, scruffy fat bloke with long hair. And it looks kind of deceptive, but I think he's definitely got something more in this early work. And from what Harry says, it's kind of tragic that if he's having to go down a line of, absolute pap.
Who knows? Some of these other slightly lower rated films that are done in between these bigger mainstream projects of his, perhaps he's taking the old trusted one for the studio, one for me, one for the paycheck, one for me route. Even if sadly Amy Jump may not be involved in them anymore, which would be quite sad, but maybe, again, as we highlighted, the films that they make together seem to have a theme of troubled marriages. Perhaps it was making things a bit rocky for them.
I'm scared to look it up, actually.
Oh,
I hope they haven't. It seems like the last thing she did was the Free Fire screenplay. Oh, she has got an upcoming one. Which has been mentioned, Freak Shift, which is pre-production. So that's an interesting bit.
Is that
the balancing. Yeah. It may be. I'm not so sure, but just to say about like the whole paying the bills thing, something that I noticed from the research on Kubrick and Lynch is that a lot of people get absorbed into the system. And it's like you do something cool and independent and then you get offered the studio work. It's hard to get out of that. And I think Kubrick managed to because he played cards extremely well and was immensely savvy with money. Lynch managed to get out of the system, like by being incredibly personal. Like people loved him, but he made he made one set of connections with Dino De Laurentiis to try and do some stuff, and then got out of that, and basically by a random connection with a very rich French guy managed to get funding to do his own vision. But I think very few people, that would be Blue Velvet and beyond.
Yeah.
He kept taking French money basically, so that he could do what he wanted, but very few people are in that situation. My brain goes to, I think David Hart is his name, or David Slade, but the director of Hard Candy and 30 Days of Night. And I was so excited for his next movie, and then it was the Twilight Eclipse.
Oh dear.
I know. Brutal.
But Lynch is very lucky he managed to get out of it, because he does Eraserhead, and you are so right. He could have just immediately got trapped into the studio network, because as much as Elephant Man is a classic, and as much as I'm sure it seemed like a huge break for him at the time, oh my God, Mel Brooks wants me to direct a big budget, high drama period piece. Oh, this is going to be my real breakthrough now. It's a real double-edged sword, because he could have got stuck after that. You know, if Dune had not flopped, if it hadn't been a critical failure, who knows? He might have just gone on to make more films like that, and I'm sure they would have been interesting and unique, because he managed to put his imprint on both of those films. But they wouldn't have been Blue Velvet. They wouldn't have been Twin Peaks. They wouldn't have been Lost Highway.
No, definitely.
So we're very lucky with him and Kubrick.
Yeah. Wheatley, find your random French guy, please.
There are plenty out there, and they probably won't even ask you such things as the BBC would.
Yeah.
Well, folks, we are, I think, unless you had anything more, I think, shall we move towards sort of closing thoughts and scores and wrap up?
Yeah, I think so.
Lovely. I will say, I don't know if we're going to make it, guys, unless you want to absolutely flurry. I don't. How on earth did we get a bonus stream on Bulverism funded, and not on the? I'm shocking. What was it about reading out a Freudian essay that's a tough sell? I just don't know. But anyway, yes. Chat. If you saw the film, let us know your thoughts with the scores. We use it out of 12 burgers scale for reasons we will not elaborate on. But I will now turn to Simon for the summary, if you'd like to kick us off.
It's a difficult film to summarize all my thoughts about, because I have to say I took tons and tons of notes, and I sort of dealt with them in a fragmented way because of the way we kind of bounced around in this. But I'd certainly say it's a film which, I mean, I may even write some stuff up about the kind of the fairy lore and all of that sort of stuff that underpins and informs the film and makes sense of it basically for you. You know, you don't have to strain at it in the way that, you know, it can just seem confusing and can be easily dismissed. I think it's visually a beautiful film. I think the acting is very fine in it. I think it's astonishing that it starts in such a way that, you know, I found the characters largely unlikable to begin with, and then by the end of the film, you know, it finds its heart and it finds its center in a way that, you know, you'd be a fool to think it's just purely sentimental sloshy pap. I think it has something that's, you know, a very stripped back message, you know, in a way that I admire. Wheatley's made a film where he's just got his set is a field. That's it. He's made this whole film in a field, and he's made it kind of shimmering and ethereal and beautiful and also, you know, disgusting in many ways as well. And a lot of that disgust is within the people. It's not necessarily within even the graphic violence, because there's so much in there that, you know, you think there's kind of prosaic, you know, hooks into this film. I mean, I thought, you know, Wheatley's about the same age as me. I know she's about the same age, a bit older. And, you know, there's probably elements of this film which just come down to the fact of taking drugs in a field. Like I said, you know, a lot of people of my generation have fond memories of, you know, the second summer of love and, you know, going to raves and stuff. And all of this stuff could, you know, feel like just an excusatory peg to hang an indulgent kind of set of visual effects on. But I don't think it's that. I think there's a really interesting metaphysic with the film that actually should be discussed further, and but for the fact that we can't put people through 6-hour streams, which I'd be perfectly happy to do, has to be restrained on this occasion. But I would say, in terms of scoring, shall I score the film, so to speak?
It's somewhat perverse and obscene to just put a number to a film like this, but I do enjoy it. Take it as how strongly you would recommend it, roughly.
Well, very, very strongly, and I don't feel I can do it justice with the score. I know the rule about the 12, so I you can't go there. But I sort of I want to give this an 11, but I feel I should restrain to a 10.5. I don't know.
Your heart says 11. You can.
It does. It does. It does. I like it very much.
Say 11.
Yeah.
Is there anything that's making you be like, oh, I wish that had been changed?
Only unfamiliarity, I think, with the film. I think I need to, see it again. Like Harry says, there's some films I just watch every so many years, and they yield new and interesting fruit. And I think this could be one of them. I don't want to sort of be, excessively flattering. It's just, for me, I think, something where the levels of conscious storytelling and a kind of embrace of an unconscious joy in the film are kind of welded together, I think, in a very, very interesting way. And it's something you kind of got to give yourself up to in a kind of way like Whitehead as a character does. And through that, achieves a kind of triumph, a sort of, a victory over himself. And which I find very, very, hopeful. Very, very optimistic, and it is about a field in England, and that is something which I think should be thought on. So I would say yes, I would give it an 11 for me. I mean, bit of spicy ketchup, and maybe a tiny amount of cheese, but none the worse for it. Very, very satisfying meal.
Well said. And this will be a divisive thing. For some people, this is going to be a 2. Couldn't get through it. It's that singular vision that means for some people, this does get to the 11. No shame in it. In the meantime, thank you very much, S.E. Romain, for $2. Adding to the fund, what number is this? You're at number 7 in donations. Mr. GB has got us to 8. Thank you very much. I can't read this anti-Stelios message. We love Stelios, but thank you, Mr. GB.
It is true that Stelios is foreign, and this does act as a point against him, but we don't hold it against him.
No.
And he is an absolutely lovely man as well.
He is. He's really lovely. Harry, over to you for closing thoughts and scores.
Well, there's not much else that I can add to it, because I think Simon's summation of it was rather beautiful. The only things that I will say is that for those of you in the audience who may not have watched it yet, please do give it a watch. Even having a rational discussion of all of these elements of the plot of the film does not compare to actually experiencing it as an audio-visual feast. It is beautiful, it is unnerving, and it is a really, really well put together film. And I'll also say, give it an 11. I was already going for an 11, so it's nice that we've got some continuity there. I'll say, as a burger, it's got some hefty dollops of ketchup, and it's all meat. There's no extra. It's to the point, and also, I have to admit, sadly, someone slipped a sausage in there.
Yeah. I'll just add to what Harry's saying there is, do get the script. It's online. I'll put a link to it. Actually, because some of the script you don't hear because of the way the sound is recorded, and some of the frenetic scenes in which some of the dialogue is spoken. But actually, there's some it's very well written dialogue in there.
Yeah. Oh, we didn't actually mention, just to mention it, when you mentioned the way the dialogue is recorded. During the trip scene, I think it's either during or right after when the wind is still blowing and you get the confrontation. I really liked the way that the sound is being overwhelmed by the sound of the wind blowing, but all of the dialogue is recorded as if they're whispering to one another. It's just a really interesting stylistic choice.
Yeah, it makes it feel like a very warm, caring relationship between them as they try to sort of save each other. And Wheatley said it was basically we had to do ADR, we had to do some dialogue replacement because the wind machine was so loud. But actually, the effect worked in the end because it focused you on the sort of closeness of their relationship at that moment.
Yeah, and it also made it feel more magical as well.
Yeah, yeah.
I was going to say that moment threw me off, and it felt to me like under the influence of like being in contact with the earth, like having taken in the magic, he was sort of piercing the veil, and just could cut out the noise and hear directly. And I thought that was
and it was a state in which people were more at peace as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh well, I don't know what more to add to it. I'm sort of sneakily seeing if I'll be on. Okay, Essie Ryan, thank you again, pushing the uncanny. You know what? I mean, I'm going to do it anyway because I really want to cover that topic, and Simon and I have been talking about it for a while.
Yeah.
But I will take it at 9, especially since I absolutely bungled the.
This isn't democracy; it's a benign dictatorship.
No,
so
democracy,
what you think really does matter.
Exactly. But thank you for voting. No, cheers everyone pitching into that. I really appreciate it. This will be a fun topic. And sorry, someone Miami Virtue asked, will there be a feedback stream on pulverization? I could do it as a topic. I'm not sure I fully got the idea across in all its aspects, but I think I got most of it. If people wanted to go and leave a comment on that stream, if there's something in particular you want to address, then I can do that as a topic. I'd be happy to. I think sort of bulverism is really interesting, and I think we should embrace it, frankly, because we do it well. But if there are pushbacks, I'd be happy to hear it. Oh, and there we go, Mr. GB. Thank you. Democracy. I love it. Thank you, Mr. GB. Much appreciated. Uncanny it is. Okay. So what can I say? Harry made a really good point. We said at the start, we can tell you what happens, but that will not convey it. You have to experience this. This is something where the combination of the sound and the disjunct between sound and sight and the focus will get everything. We can't really give you the experience of the, just for example, the stroboscopic sequence. You've got to get there through the entire film for it to hit, and it is worth doing. I was not a fan early on. I took a long time to get comfortable with the dialogue, but then the way it was shot, the closeness, the emoting that was in there, the performances brought me in. So I'm glad I stuck with it. I don't know if I would go all the way to 11, but I think this is something I really want to watch again to try and get more out of. It's also very brisk, and I'm increasingly a big fan of something that doesn't spell it out, that you get to work from, that we can have these different reactions to. So this is a strong 10.5 for me. 10.5 burgers. No cheese, but there is a sly little bit of dark cheese in there for people looking out for it, which is a bit of a Jump and Wheatley special. Great ketchup, sparingly used but powerful, and a little bit of pickle, in there. So fantastic stuff. Really, really happy discovery. I think I do prefer Kill List, but maybe on rewatches that will change.
Maybe we would have to arrange a group watch. under the influence of magic mushrooms, or psilocybe semilanceata in the UK, liberty caps. They are a Class A drug, by the way, so of course we can't encourage you to go out into agricultural fields where they tend to grow near cattle dung and try them. But
right. Not that I would ever admit to having done such a thing in the past, but given a friend's experiences on that drug in the past, I feel like that would be a terrible idea to watch this.
Interestingly, Wheatley talks about they did some research which mentioned the use of hallucinogenics back in the 17th century. I couldn't find anything about it. The earliest recorded stuff about it was in 1799. There was a family in London who went wandering in Green Park in the centre of London and picked some mushrooms, took them home and cooked them, and they all freaked out.
Oh, I bet they did. Imagine being the first person to
in the 18th century.
That's what these mushrooms do. You would think you're being possessed.
Yeah.
Damn a weird experience. Goodness. But can't. Well, maybe we'll do that as a fringe event next Tory Party conference. Bring the bear suit again. All right, folks. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for supporting the bonus stream. We'll try and do a monthly bonus stream. It's a bit of fun, and if there's a stream goal that I don't mess up, then it's a nice little encouragement. So I'll sort that for you. I'll schedule that with Simon. We'll work out the best way to present this the fairly dense 19-page essay in a way that's accessible and fun. And he will no doubt limit the amount of time I spend talking about sort of German etymology. But that was your review of A Field in England, your horror homework for next week to close off the modern folk horror arc. There's no way there's only one left. Gloomneck, there is. Oh, you're getting stinged in April, guys. Modern folk horror arc. I'm torn. I was recommended by one Welsh rug merchant, was a big fan of Lord of Misrule. A lot of people have talked about The Ritual. I'm torn. What do you reckon? The Ritual, Lord of Misrule. What are we feeling? Draw of Wraith's Ball.
I like the title, Lord of Misrule. I don't know anything about the film.
It's more modern. I think it's a little more out there. I think we go Lord of Misrule because I've seen The Ritual and it was good fun, but I don't know if it really goes into our folk horror territory. So I think we're going to go Lord of Misrule. We'll see how that goes. I'll give it a watch. If it is absolutely not what we want to cover, you'll see it in a stream announcement. But I think that's what we're going to go with. Lord of Misrule, I believe, 2023. Should be intriguing. So that will be the end. And then the month after that, we're going to start doing member requests, as there's quite a few people who've put in member requests. And I just thought, you know what, let's do that for May. We like to give back. Now, with that all said, thank you very much, chat, for your generosity. And thank you again to Simon and Harry.
Thank you for having me.
Same here. Thank you very much for having me on again.
It's a pleasure as always, chaps. And I will leave it there. Folks, I hope you have... Oh, we got to say anyway, if you haven't checked out the Adam Curtis streams that Simon has been doing on Academic Agents channel, they're an absolute joy. More of that wonderful research is present, just sort of really just bringing everything up a couple of levels. It is well worth your time, even if you've never seen an Adam Curtis documentary. It's binge those. They're fantastic viewing.
Thank you very much.
And of course, Harry, the quality content, certainly in the coverage of the Kubrick stream, I think.
Oh, yes. And there'll be something cool coming soon as well.
Well, I for one would love it if there were more in-depth Lotus Eaters series on wonderful directors. That would just be a joy. Certainly worth subscribing for.
It certainly would be. Hint with chat.
Yeah. So Simon and Harry are wonderful people. Go and follow them, support their work. They're excellent. And with that said, I think I'm gabbling now, so I'll simply say, folks, I hope you got a lovely Friday tomorrow and a lovely weekend after that, and I'll leave it there. Thanks, y'all. Cheers.